This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know if we can we expand unhinged headline into unhinged newspaper. The response of one newspaper this morning to that very anodyne speech by Keir Starmer yesterday is absolutely, and I'm going to get it out early today, extraordinary. Hey, listen to this. 7 pillars, 6 milestones, 5 missions, 3 foundations, but not one firm target to cut migration. Our sketch writer endures. And then the biggest words of all, Starmer's bingo hall parade of buzzwords and political nerd speak. Again, it falls to me to remind you that these are the people who told you that Liz Truss was an economic genius, that Boris Johnson was the new Winston Churchill, that Brexit would make us richer and lither and happier, and that austerity, a consequence of an international financial crisis caused in large part by irresponsible bankers, must be paid for by librarians in Wolverhampton and Sure Start mothers in Stoke Newington. These are the same people. And yesterday's speech prompts the kind of response that I think is probably more at home in Looney Tunes cartoons, which means once again we have to turn to each other for slightly more sane guidance. And I'm drawn immediately to 2 texts that came into the programme yesterday when we did that quick roundup after the speech had finished. And listen, this is not a conversation about the speech, just in case you didn't catch it, in case you weren't listening. In which case, you know how it works. I need a letter off your mum by the end of morning break today to explain why you weren't listening to yesterday's programme in its entirety. I am not here. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not here for my entertainment, you know. But you don't need to have heard it to acknowledge that Keir Starmer, dullness is a funny word, isn't it? So I don't think anybody aspires to be dull, do they? Except possibly John Major. There's already a good example of somebody whose dullness was perhaps a positive. In the immediate aftermath of Margaret Thatcher's roller coaster ride of a premiership, perhaps there was something quite appealing about John Major's dullness. He wasn't dull behind closed doors. There was a kind of perception that it was spies. Eleanor points out, you want dull spies. I'd have been a rubbish spy as a young man because I'd have wanted everybody to know that I was a spy. The show-off gene was so burnished and overdeveloped in me that I would have found it unbearable to pretend that I was just a mild-mannered janitor or that I was just working in human resources in a bank when in fact I was a spy. I'd have let it slide. After a small sherry or two, I would have taken people into my confidence and told them I was a spy, which is why I would have been the worst spy in the world. And the problem is, if I say I could do it now, though, I'd almost be disqualifying myself from consideration for secret missions, at which I think I would today be rather good. So dull spies, dull prime ministers. Major writes Bruce was underrated. Milton, meanwhile, writes Boris was not dull, James, but he was a disaster. Well, remember, not according to the people describing Keir Starmer's speech yesterday as a bingo hall parade of buzzwords and political nerd speak. They thought that Boris Johnson's lies, dishonesty and debauchery were brilliant, so much so that they're currently paying him hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to write a column in the newspaper. So the 2 texts that came into the programme came in with a really striking synchronicity. It came in at more or less exactly the right time. And one of them essentially portrayed Keir Starmer's acknowledged dullness as a negative. One of them saw it very much as a positive. And it was the thing I took away from yesterday's show, actually, or certainly it was the thing I took away from the political element of yesterday's show. And I thought we could actually wade into it today. Do you want to hear the early gut shots? Can we call them gut shots? That's a nice word, isn't it? I start doing that most mornings. I start a topic and the texts come in before the phone calls do. So have a listen to the early gut shots. Anthony writes, I prefer my politics dull and I prefer to let them get on with the job even when I don't agree with them. As a teenager and in my early 20s, I would get frustrated with the slow pace of change. But by my 30s, I appreciated that things have to move slowly. I've only been hyper-engaged in politics since 2016 for obvious reasons, because I felt that it was urgent. I now feel more relaxed and I'm happy to let the new lot get on with the job, at least for a year or so. Yeah, I mean, some of the writers I admire most from the younger generation are suggesting that Starmer needs to start giving people something to cheer. That the storytelling is appalling for this government, for this administration. You can forgive it up to a point, but as Anthony says, how long can you forgive it for? Moving from opposition to government is an enormous culture shock that they seem to have been ill prepared for, but none of that is relevant to Starmer's personal attributes or otherwise. Alan writes, one of Sir Keir's biggest challenges is the necessary return of realism to government. After years of delusion and boosterism, if he pulls it off, it will be quite an achievement. Oh, you know, when people call for realism, you have to remember, and this is currently more of a problem for the Tories than the Labour Party, but not forever. You've got a demagogue or a populist like Farage sitting in the wings, heckling, offering up an alternative to reality, offering up promises that are unkeepable, winning things like the Brexit referendum and then washing his hands completely of the consequences. It's a big threat. It's a big danger to any mission to impose realism. James writes, I'm in the thank God camp, James. Prime ministers are not there to entertain us. I don't know, who else sees Russell Crowe at that point? He says they're not there to entertain. Anyone else immediately? It's probably because I saw the film relatively recently. I wanted to see the original before I went to see the sequel. Are you not entertained? No? No, all right, just me. Sorry. But he's right, isn't it? We've had entertaining politicians, entertaining prime ministers. Perhaps we have had our fill of them. But the question of whether the dullness is a positive or a negative is one that I would like you to start with today. I'd like you to have a proper crack at. A few more gut shots. John writes, hi, James. Keir is so done. I sit on the thank God fence. Tony writes, Keir is so dull, he makes dishwater look glowing. Needs a bit of work, Tony, but I think the sentiment is easily expressed. I wouldn't open with it, as comedians often say to each other. And Nikki, we're not talking about this, but I'll read it anyway because it's quite entertaining. If Boris Johnson could put the son of a KGB agent in the Lords, Michelle Mone, and make the hapless Gavin Williams a knight, give a 20-something spad and loads of other undeserving fawners, then of course Sadiq Khan should be honoured. He's been voted Mayor of London 3 times. I think he's great, and he gets more threats than any other politician apart from Diane Abbott. That's from Nikki in Kent. I don't know who's got a problem with the most successful British politician in the history of mayoralties getting a knighthood, but I imagine the kind of goons and bigots that were booing him last time he won an election would be very unhappy about it, but who cares about their opinion in the civilised universe? 10 minutes after 10 is the time. So I kind of don't know what the answer to this is. A friend of mine who I respect is often telling me very kindly, if that's the right word to use, that, and let me choose my words carefully here because I don't want to sound accidentally immodest. I'm happy to sound deliberately immodest, as you know, but not accidentally. That just talking about a speech that could have been given yesterday that would have been a lot more electrifying. And it may have contained more or less exactly the same words. This is the crux of the conversation that I want to have with you today. It may have contained exactly the same words, but it would have been delivered in a much more electrifying fashion. Boris Johnson is unique. That's neither a good thing nor a bad thing necessarily, but for me it's very much a bad thing. He wasn't an electrifying speaker, but he just had an ability to take a room with him. Trump is similar. Trump, I was told by a BBC journalist who's followed him around America for years, that you can come out of those rallies that we laugh at because we take clips out of context and find him ridiculous, but they are almost religious in their impact on some people. They're incredible experiences. She said she could come out almost persuaded to vote for him. And Starmer possesses none of that. I don't think that's a controversial comment. Darren wrote yesterday, I voted for him, but I can't listen to him. He's so boring. Stu wrote, in the same minute, they arrived in my inbox right on top of each other. Stu wrote, he's so dull. Thank God for that. And I think today, for the first time, we're going to do a topic based entirely upon texts from yesterday's show. I want you to tell me whether you are Team Darren, dullness is bad, or Team Stu, dullness is good. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The idea that the dullness, the carrying of the Ming vase, the pragmatism, The grown-ups are back in the room. The sensibleness was an electoral asset, albeit that majority was wide and very, very shallow. It's an extraordinary mandate that Keir Starmer has, but not built upon an extraordinary vote share. Just the way our electoral system works, it delivered buckets of seats and enormous levels of power. He can do as Prime Minister whatever he wants. But as the right-wing media goes genuinely mad, another colleague this morning who I respect greatly, I don't know why people come to me with this. So no, not you, Keith, mate. I'll come to you later. All right. So first one says, if you'd given that speech yesterday, things would have been very different. But I do this for a living. This is literally my job. It's not Keir Starmer's job. It's my job to hopefully engage you and entertain you, even annoy you, inform you, excite you, all of those things, ideally before 10:15 in the morning. But the second colleague said to me, why are they going so bonkers so early, James? I'm certainly a keen chronicler, a keen watcher, if not necessarily an expert. That's not for me to say. On the hysteria of the right-wing media, on the madness. I've written books about the damage that it does to a country to persuade people that they are under threat from entirely innocuous actors, when in fact the real enemies of their own advancement are the people at the top of the pyramid, sustaining the status quo, retaining epic inequality, promoting division in the ranks, because that's how you rule, isn't it? You divide and you rule. But I don't understand why they've gone so bonkers. Keir Starmer delivers let's say, a mediocre speech, shall we? Which I thought had, like the curate's egg, I thought it was good in parts. And the Daily Mail responds, as I said a moment ago, as if he'd spent 30 minutes barbecuing baby hedgehogs and having a fist fight with Pudsey Bear. And I don't understand why. What are they so freaked out by? What are they so scared of? What are they so angry? If he's so awful, why are they so hysterical? But what I want you to tell me first is whether or not you personally find the dullness a positive or a negative. 0345 6060973. And you can use that as a jumping off point. Of course you can. It doesn't have to be a binary, dull or not dull. You could say it's not quite that, it's more this, or it's not quite this, it's more that. But that's where I want you to go first. Team Darren, I voted for him, but I can't listen to him. He's so boring. Doesn't necessarily mean you disapprove of him politically. You just don't want to listen to the speech. Whereas Stu writes, he's so dull. I prefer Stu's message in syntactical terms. I think it's a neater delivery. It's a nicer package because it takes you somewhere and then swings you back. You go, he's so dull. Thank God for that. I definitely was there in the run-up to the general election. Whether I'm still there still there now or not, I'm not entirely sure. We'll find out just before 11 o'clock. And Barry says, which proves my point about binary, I find Starmer boring and I can't listen to him, James. And that's what I like about him after all the amateurs we've had recently. So both your texts are right. Where do you sit on this? I think that's the third way. So Team Darren, Team Stu or Team Barry? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:16. I almost brought this one in on time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
We need a fourth. So we've got Darren, Stu and Barry. But you need a fourth one, which is that it doesn't matter whether he's dull or not. This isn't what you should be talking about, don't we? Do we need that? Because Darren says Keir Starmer's dull, I can't bear it. Stu says Keir Starmer's dull, I love it, thank goodness. Barry says I agree with both of them. And then you need a fourth one, which says he's neither dull nor not dull. The reason I've got a problem with him has nothing to do with his dullness, or the reason that I like him has nothing to do with his undullness. I don't think anyone disputes the dullness. He's not a dull person, but he gives dull delivery. And I just want to know where you sit on that scale. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 10:18 is the time. Peter is in St Albans. Peter, what do you reckon?
Hi, yeah. Lovely to talk to you, James.
Right, it's a bit early to arrive at that conclusion, Peter, but I shall do my best to live up to your expectations.
Okay, yeah. Now, I support Labour and the Lib Dems, and I'm really pleased that we've got such a lot of MPs in Parliament, about 80% are progressive. But there's a failure here by people like Sir Keir to really become more dramatic. I mean, yesterday, I was listening. Everything he's talking about is relevant and important, but there's a monotony. It lacks humour. It lacks personality. It needs more modulation. I remember years ago, Thatcher, of course, had a lot of training. I mean, she changed from when she first was elected.
I used to know the name of the person that had trained her, actually, but my memory's not what it was. I mean, certainly they employed Tim Bell, didn't they, to do all manner of things to her image and her kind of demeanour.
Yeah, and Tony Blair was a natural, of course.
Yes, he was. Although, I mean, Mandelson and Campbell had him by the elbows. But Steve Coogan told me an extraordinary story once, Peter, which I think speaks directly to your to parts of your point, in that he was doing a thing on stage with Blair at a conference, and he was in character, I think, as Alan Partridge. And Mandelson said to Blair before they went onto the stage, so when you get onto the stage, take your jacket off, put it over the back of the sofa and roll your sleeves up. And Steve Coogan thought, I hope I'm allowed to tell you this story, Peter, but it's a bit late now. And he sort of thought, well, it won't be that colour by numbers. It won't be that prescriptive. And then when they walked onto the stage, he did exactly that. So authenticity is always a slightly difficult concept, isn't it? You can come across as very authentic, but it doesn't necessarily mean you are being authentic.
True, yeah, but I just worry the populists are we don't need to name them, but they are good at making speeches, or at least they know how to appeal to people, particularly those who are not high up in politics. And I just think that, I don't know, listening to Sakir yesterday, and don't get me wrong, everything he's doing I'm following and believing.
Yeah.
But he sounded more like when I was young, I used to go to Methodist churches, as you do when you go when you're young, and you'd be listening to a preacher or someone and you'd be drifting away. Unlike, say, those American, I don't know what they are they
evangelists?
Preachers, evangelists who just know how to hold you.
This is so brilliant because, I mean, you know, you're describing demagogues, populists, religious charlatans, and you're saying he needs to be a bit more like them. And I know exactly what you mean, but that's when I start leaning towards Team Stu, and I think, no, it's got to be good that he's not like that. But you're Team Darren.
But just, and a further point, he's not getting over the worst aspects of what we've endured this last few years. I mean, for example,
go on.
I was reading that we're 20 years behind Sweden, Denmark and Norway in female cancer survival. I mean, he could bring in things like that and it would capture people's attention, you know.
The story. I think you're talking about the story. I mean, he can work on the storytelling. I think it was Gordon Rees, James reminds me, that was responsible. I mean, you can listen to Thatcher's voice change, the modulation in her voice. It was as if they dismantled her and put her back together again to reach voters differently from how she was originally constituted. But there's two things here. There's the storytelling, and then there's the story. And I probably disagree with you a bit about the storytelling, although I understand exactly where you're coming from. A bit of pizzazz might be welcome, but the problem is the story. If the story was brilliantly compelling, then perhaps the dullness of the storyteller would not matter so much. Peter, thank you. That's the perfect start to this conversation. Alex is in Tetbury. Alex, what made you pick up the phone?
Thanks, James. I love the show. Yes, I listened to it yesterday, and the messaging, the message is fine, but it's a lack of inspiration that he conveys to his populace, and the population is awful. So if you look at the first 6 months, they've come in, and change was needed. Let's be honest, the last lot were a shambles, but he's alienated certain groups. He's now delivered 3 sort of speeches where you're not quite sure what the message is. Pillars, milestones and missions, you would talk about, wouldn't you? It's just lack of clarity about what he's actually going after. He can't win, though, in that way. I suppose if he'd carried on calling them, if he'd stuck with one of them, then we could say today, he is. He's coming back. He's trying to be clearer. He's reinforcing. He's re-endorsing. But it sounds like he's reinventing, and that's confusing. Yeah, but they had 2 years to get their sort of ducks in a row and find out their messaging. And it's just complicated, it lacks clarity, and just a lack of delivery and inspiration is going to turn people off if he doesn't deliver. Well, it already is, mate, isn't it? It already is. There's no doubt about that. Where's the line then? Because I like this. So your team, Darren, we're working on the presumption that Darren's description of the dullness as being unbearable is electorally salient. It may influence his vote, but that other thing that Peter brought into the mix, the difference between storytelling
and story. We can't change the storyteller, although the storyteller can change himself. Yeah. But what is it for you, the storytelling or the story? I sense it's more story.
A bit of both, I think. I think when you listen to a great speaker, there has to be some humour, there has to be an anchor, and I just feel you could listen to Keir Starmer every day and you'd not remember what he said, really, because there was nothing that you can't. It's so forgettable. It's so forgettable.
And what can he do about that?
Well, he is who he is, right?
I think so.
He's a good person. He needs coaching of some sort.
He needs better advice. He needs better comms. He needs much, much better comms. They need to find something that they can show to the British public that will win over people like you, who are clearly winnable. So Darren is streaking ahead at the moment, leaving Stu and Barry in his wake. But of course, it's not even half time. This is nice. I got a message from someone who I can vouch for their qualifications in this field, but I can't tell you who it is. I was at that event, James. I helped to organise it. The big difference between Tony Blair and Keir Starmer is that Tony could pull off something like that, interacting with Alan Partridge when Alan Partridge was in character. Keir couldn't do it. And there's no way that they would ever let him try, brackets, I hope, close brackets. But again, when you do the post-mortems on Tony Blair's premiership, the negative column will contain words like glibness or the, slickness, smoothness. Can't win, can you, if you're a politician? Major is probably the one that is most relevant to this discussion, for whom dullness perhaps became a positive, but also, obviously, was a negative at the same time. Sarah's in Todmorden. Sarah, what would you like to say?
I agree that I think he is dull, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he's a decent bloke.
Yeah.
What I worry about, though, is that it leaves a bit of a void for the right-wing media to prey on the Labour Party, because there are such big characters on the right. We've got, Badenoch and Farage, both big controversial characters. Having said that, though, I don't think that the Labour front bench is not void of those characters. You've got Lammy, you've got Streeton, you've got Rayner. If Starmer can't provide that, and with the best will in the world, he can't transform his personality, and I wouldn't expect him to.
No.
But you've got people on the front bench who can provide that bit of oomph and bit of controversy from time to time. And just use those people. Stop. Stop. It's not a one-man band. It doesn't have to be.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. And I mean, obviously, when elections are looming into sight, turning up on the horizon, then it becomes more of a collective. But I mean, some of and I think personally that everyone's jumped a little bit early on this, even the good columnists and the good commentators. But if he doesn't start connecting more with the public, then questions will be asked about his leadership. Puts your point in an even brighter light, doesn't it? Because if you're thinking already about the possibility of taking over from him, and senior politicians are nothing if not ambitious, Sarah, then it might actually serve. I don't know. It would be a double-edged sword, wouldn't it, to start putting some potential future rivals in the spotlight more.
I don't think it would, I really don't. I think it would. Prescott was a massive character. He never detracted from Blair.
That's very true. So you've said, quite rightly, can't change personality, so you're stuck with the storyteller. You can work on the storytelling. I think they've dropped the ball there hugely. I know nothing about their communications operation except that it is not working. It's misfiring horribly.
No, it's not.
And then the story is probably the thing that needs to be sorted out first and fast.
What I think they need some good plain speakers to actually cut through. He's a bit corporate, Steve. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, that's a lawyer as well. He's not a colourful QC or KC. Wasn't one of the ones that would be doing great flurries of imaginative rhetoric in the. Someone said to me once, Sarah, that there are two types of very good barristers. The ones that the judges respond to and the ones that the juries respond to. And Starmer is very much in the former category. He doesn't play to the gallery. And as Prime Minister or as a major politician, perhaps you have to. But then you remind us of the ones that do nothing else. You know, the hecklers who only ever lob stuff from the sidelines and appear as a consequence of never having responsibility for anything to have all the answers to everything. It was interesting to see Alistair Campbell pull down Nigel Farage's trousers last night on Question Time, but Farage just does what he always does. He disowns everything. Brexit's nothing to do with me. Move on. I'm not responsible for anything at all. And yet, you know, the sense that Starmer needs to bring a little bit of magic to the table remains. Got a couple of phone lines free now. Grab the one that Sarah is vacating on 0345 60973 is the number that you need. I mean, if you work in this sector, if you work in comms or presentation or whatever the correct word is, how much can you teach? How much can you improve someone? I choose my words carefully because I don't want to make anyone feel bad or self-conscious who is similarly conditioned. But sometimes it sounds to me like his tongue is too big for his mouth. And it means he swallows words or he loses a word. And I find that personally really irritating. I find that the importance of oratory in politics has been clear since the ancients. It's not a recent development. It's not shallow or naive to talk about the quality of the storytelling or the speech making. I'm just surprised he hasn't actually worked on simple elocution. But maybe that's me indulging one of my pet subjects a little bit too much. I don't know, but you can tell me. 0345 6060973. It's 10:31. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:34. Don't forget, writes Callista, that even Thatcher had to be coached to high heaven. Every inch of her image was manufactured. I haven't forgotten it. I mentioned it at the top of the show. One of us wasn't listening, and it clearly wasn't me. But it's a valid point and an important point in that Keir Starmer seems to eschew the polishing that previous prime ministers have embraced. Johnson eschewed it as well. He did all his own polishing. He's the kind of man who would actively and deliberately ruffle his own hair and sort of untuck his shirt before he walked onto a stage. The rest of us tidy up our hair and tuck in our shirt, especially those of us who are cursed with innate, almost unavoidable scruffiness. But Johnson would do the opposite. There's some fascinating first-hand eyewitness accounts written of how carefully cultivated his image was. But it was self-cultivated. He'd been doing it since he decided to drop his real name and call himself Boris instead of Alexander. So, but Thatcher very much. I grew, I choose my words a little bit carefully, I dressed John Major once. And he was actually really interested in clothes. Really interested in the detailing on a decent suit, which I was partly responsible for kitting him out in on one occasion. You may have heard the story before, but he wasn't dull in that sense. And yet, Private Eye finished him off, didn't they, by making him grey. Even his skin was grey, not just his suits were grey. Starmer's not quite in that camp, although if Private Eye was still around, one wonders what classic joke they would do, you know, like the way they put David Steele in David Owen's pocket. Wonder what classic joke Private Eye would bring to highlight what we're trying to unpick regarding Keir Starmer. But he needs something. And I think he thinks it's a bit, well, no, because he took all the suits, didn't he? So he obviously recognises on some level that appearance is important, image is important, expensive-ish spectacles and nice new suits, the need to not wear the same clothes all the time. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something else. And we're wondering how important it is. Did I say if Private Eye was still around? I meant Spitting Image. I do apologise. Everyone's a blooming critic, aren't they? 10:36 is the time. So Team Darren is I voted for him, but I just can't listen to this. He's so dull. Team Stu is... He's so dull, thank God for that. And then Team Barry, I find Starmer boring and I can't listen to him. And that's what I like after the amateurs we've had recently. So both your texts are correct. Which one are you? Jack's in Newton Abbot. Jack, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Jack.
I think I said in Team Barry, really. I think that...
He's way ahead. I just did a search. Keith showed me how to use the magnifying glass and do a search. Team Barry's way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I think after the tumultuous 14 years that we've had to endure with the populism and the nonsense of things like Johnson and Truss, for Starmer to come in with a degree of gravitas and to explain to the country, look, it is bad, I think is what has been required. Now what I think he needs to do is he needs to pivot and demonstrate real leadership beyond the formulaic process that he wants to implement, which is around judge me in 5 years' time on these deliverables.
Yeah.
What I believe he needs to do now is show leadership, and that is about giving the country a vision and standing behind that vision to engender confidence.
This is what he thinks
really
he did. This is what he thinks he did yesterday, and yet he clearly didn't, did he?
No, he didn't. And I think if I run a business, and actually what my job in that business is to do is to provide direction and leadership, but also to engender confidence in people. And, look at the retail landscape at the moment. People are not spending. People are worried about the cost of living. What his responsibility as a leader is to do is to build that confidence back in the nation.
How does he do that then? How does he do that?
Well, I think he does it in part, what he's trying to do, which is around delivery. But I think the other part of it around it is to really grab hold of what is essential and important to people and to spell out to them how the country can get back on track. And at the moment, I feel he is so constrained by the decisions that he's made that, frankly, the national insurance rise, those sort of things, that will have a detrimental effect on employment. Businesses are going to have to reduce headcount to absorb costs.
And yet they had to find some money from somewhere.
Of course.
So where else could it have come from? Maybe he could have made that point more keenly. Maybe he could have spoken directly to your grievance and said, this is, no pain, no gain. It might not be convincing, but he's left it hanging, as it were.
But equally, what he's also done is said, we have to take the tough decisions. He hasn't. He's deferred those tough decisions to individual businesses who then have to be the bad guy or the bad woman by making
I don't know what a difficult decision would be that didn't involve other people's money, because the government doesn't have any money in and of its own. Could you teach it, do you think? Could you? I presume it can be taught, because the world is full of people offering leadership seminars and how-to books and self-help guides and all that, to become a more how to win friends and influence people. It goes all the way back to Andrew Carnegie. But can you teach it? Could Starmer, would he do well to try to learn some skills that he doesn't currently have?
I believe so. I think there's a blend here as well, which your previous caller said around using the people around him to project that image, which I think is really important, which is not everybody can be everything to everybody, and therefore pull in the resources. We saw it in Sunak's election campaign. He made that all about himself because he felt he was the only one with any credibility, and guess what? That backfired.
Well, he probably was, to be fair to Sunak, but that's not the situation that Starmer finds himself in. And again, that such is the nature of the media. So Keith said earlier that these speeches aren't supposed to be enjoyed in their entirety. They're supposed to be delivered for clips for the news at 10 and for the LBC bulletins, and there is some truth in that. But of course, what we didn't see was the run-up to the speech, where there were other people involved, and there is the theatre of bringing someone onto the stage who had an incredible, compelling story to tell. They always do that. Or having Angela Rayner doing warm-up. I don't think she was yesterday, but that's what reaches the public is often not what leaves the room. And that's why the side order this morning, if you're up for it, would be, why is the right-wing media going so bonkers? I understand why some corners of it are so cross about a 3-time elected London mayor being nominated for a knighthood. It's because he's brown. Let's not make any bones about that. That's clearly the problem there. But why is the right-wing media going so bonkers about Keir Starmer already when the election is 4.5 years away? And if they're to be believed, he's making a mess of everything, so they don't need to... Well, I don't know. Where people are asking me why the right-wing... And the Daily Mail is the leader here, not the Telegraph. The Telegraph has quite a sober front page. PM drops pledges as economy stumbles. And that is journalism. The Daily Mail, Starmer's bingo hall parade of buzzwords and political nerd speak. That is pantomime. And I don't know why they're pulling out their biggest guns months in when there are years ahead. 10:42 is the time. Jean's in Thanet in Kent. Jean, what would you like to say?
Well, good morning, James.
Hello, Jean.
Hello. I watched the speech, and I did actually see...
What do you think I was doing here?
No. What I was going to say was, and I watched Angela Rayner, her speech beforehand.
Oh, she did do warm-up, did she? I forgot that. I missed
and
that.
And then a young lady called Bliss spoke about her job with installing heat
That's
pumps.
right, yes.
And that was really good, and you watched it. So then, and I am a big supporter of Keir Starmer.
Really?
And I think we've got a grown-up in the room. And I do think the PR side, their communication side, needs sorting out. I was saying to your colleague that when Tony Blair came in, he was very charismatic.
Yes.
And we had Gordon Brown as a chancellor, who was very dour and very solid, and I thought he was a brilliant chancellor. And then when he became prime minister, it just didn't work because he was so... Following on from Tony Blair, I mean, I know we then went into the global crisis,
and there was that when he called that woman bigoted, that was hugely significant.
Yeah.
I think that probably lost him the election, actually. But the main mistake, if we were to rewrite history, would have been to postpone, to be too cautious. If he'd gone for an election 6 months after becoming prime minister, he'd have romped home.
Yes, because we're still in the youth. We were still.
That's right.
So
And also, the consequences of his economic decisions were being enjoyed before the global financial crisis knocked the skin off the rice pudding. Yeah. It was Dale Carnegie, not Andrew. My apologies, I got that wrong. So there are not many of you around. Have you not? Have you not been slightly disappointed with the opening?
Yeah. Well, can I just say that
anything you want?
When they came in, obviously majorly chuffed.
Yes.
Now I'm 73, and when they announced the winter fuel, I was like, yeah, absolutely, of course. I could understand because I, in a small way, worked in, I was a business manager in a school.
Right.
So I had seen throughout all the cuts we had to manage a budget and where you sit, and you've got revenue and you've got capital. So immediately I thought, okay, they've gone for the revenue.
Right.
They've got to stop it in July so that all the systems get in place. What I do, follow, it was the way it was put across. I was very like, well, that's it. And then, of course, people immediately go,
bad comms. Everywhere we go, people are saying that the communications, the messaging is bad.
It's bad. And I looked up the history of when it was introduced by Gordon Brown and how much the pension was then and why he introduced it. And but I personally, no, I have got no friends of similar age and older that need it. So I was very but I am so alone when I talk to various people who I don't think they need it. But
they're very cross that it's been taken away.
Yeah, and I was like, but we don't need it. Give it to, the National Health needs it. It's the macro and the micro. Macro is what the country needs. Micro is people's pockets. So anyway...
Well, I get that in my inbox. I get people saying my mother-in-law's furious about the winter fuel allowance. She told me before going off on her 4th holiday of the year.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yes. But it isn't. Because, I mean, no one likes to, or hardly anybody likes to have stuff taken away from them.
No, well, we know that, like you pointed to again with the farmers, I've looked that up, and I think you mentioned it, the inheritance tax was payable up to 1984.
Yes.
Oh, let me see, we had a Conservative government take it away.
Yeah.
And all these people that say, I inherited, it's gone back far. I thought, well, you inherited all these generations when it was inheritance tax was payable. So why actually...
Farming somehow survived when they were paying more than they will be required to pay when the new policy comes in. But again, I mean, it's so easy to say to people, they're taking away your biscuits. And then you get very cross about it. What the job of the government should be, and this is why this conversation, not just with you, but the whole morning, seems to keep coming back to comms and messaging, storytelling as much as story, although I'd say as much as, so I'd say 50-50, is that they're just not getting it out there. They're not getting that message to people. We need to explain why this is necessary. And that's when you sit here thinking, well, if you can explain that taking away the winter fuel allowance from old people who don't need it, albeit that if they end up taking it away from old people who turn out to have needed it, it's a different heap of problems. But from the people who don't need it, you explain we can't ask one section of society to bear the burden alone. It has to be a collective operation to begin the process of rebuilding a country brought to its knees by Brexit and 14 years of Tory rule. Problem number one, he never mentions Brexit in that kind of context. And problem number two is that he lacks the, whatever the word is we're looking for today, Gene, where he lacks the something to make those cases, to make those arguments. Odd, because you'd have thought a lawyer could litigate in that way. But if you can, I said at the start, if you can take it away from pensioners, the message you need to send to the public is everybody's in this now. Even the sections of society that have been protected enormously unfairly by successive Tory governments. No one feels that they've been treated unfairly in a positive way. No one ever feels they've been a beneficiary of unfairness. Everyone always feels keenly they've been a loser in unfairness. No one ever says, I'm on the right side of that inequity. They think, I work bloody hard. That's why I can send my children to private school. They never think I'm lucky. They never think I've come out on top of inequality. It's why those of us that do acknowledge that are kryptonite for a certain type of right-winger. You say, there's no earthly way I'd be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for my privilege. And you're not allowed to say that. You've got to believe that you somehow deserve it. But if you can say to a country, look, even pensioners who've been the beneficiaries of fiscal unfairness for years because they're more likely to vote Tory, even they're putting their shoulder to the wheel, so you have to. That's how I'd have sold it. It's not what they've done. Jamie suggests the word we're looking for is élan. Élan. And Steve also goes for a French word. He goes for va-va-voom.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:51 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Robbie writes in Chelmsford, I desperately want to contribute as I'm in a consultancy and I'm used to presenting programmes of change. Starmer needs to channel what he is for the nation. He's not just the grown-up. He's the responsible, caring father who must give us our medicine. He should think of his children and speak to and about them and their life chances. He's getting lost in KPIs and milestones when he should be speaking about how he will ensure the nation's children grow up free from hunger and filled with hope. I like that, actually. My gut instinct, my reflex reaction to almost everything that comes into the studio is to start picking holes in stuff, whether I like it or not, whether I agree with it or not. But I quite like that. I do think there's something in that. I mean, almost paternalistic approach. I don't know whether it would be supremely successful, but I think it would be better than where we are now, where it is managerial as opposed to, parental. The line. Well, how thin is the line between paternal and patronising? It's not a coincidence. It's going to go a bit. It's not a coincidence that those words sound so similar. Paul's in Burnley. Paul, what do you think?
Morning, James.
Hello, Paul.
I'm happy to provide a voice from outside the southeast of England this morning.
Has it been very southeast heavy today?
Yeah, it has.
I hadn't noticed that. I mean, I'll tell you now on my screen, I've got Peterlee in Yorkshire. I've got I've got Belfast. I've got you in Burnley. I hadn't clocked that. It's not really true anymore, but some days it will happen. Yesterday we had two people from Warrington directly after each other. No one rang in to complain about that.
Right. Okay.
Go on, Paul.
It's just talking about Keir Starmer and his dullness.
Yes.
And inherent dullness. And I think Sadiq Khan is obviously missing a trick, because what he needs to do to raise more funds is to declare Keir Starmer as an ultra-low charisma zone.
Right. I wouldn't open with it.
Too late now.
Yeah, you're right, it is. No, well, actually, you opened with complaining about other calls, and then you went on to be the worst of the day so far. But hey, it's all about taking part. Let's. I don't know. Maybe so. Every time we went near Keir Starmer, we'd have to give 20 quid to Sadiq Khan. Is that how it works?
Well, yeah, I haven't thought it through too far.
Don't worry, I'm teasing you. Yeah. Where are we on this question of dullness and its relevance, its electoral salience, or indeed the distinction between story and storytelling?
I don't think it's particularly the messenger. I think it's the message,
right,
as is.
Go on.
I'm in the heart of the red wall, James.
Yes.
You know, you probably couldn't get one of any more working class as somewhere around here, and the current disconnect with the working class people and politics in general, but particularly the Labour Party that should be the working class party. The disconnect with them people are so dismayed and disenchanted by what's happened so far.
What do they want? What would work if I put you in charge? Serious answers only, please, Paul.
Okay. the reversal of the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance.
Yeah. I don't know that would help. I think the damage is already done, and the question then would become, where are they going to get the money from instead?
Well, you know, with another caller touched on the idea that the adults are back in the room. An adult thing to do is admit you were wrong. But
they don't think they were. And the question, where would the money come from instead? Where would they get this money from instead? And also, you know, the winter fuel allowance goes to the richest people in the country. So the idea that it should be completely reversed is a bit daft.
I said to your researcher that I know lots and lots of people, and I genuinely do, who are who are just over that threshold.
Yeah, that's a worry. Yes, I do, and that would not involve a reversal. That would involve a revision, and there I could probably meet you halfway and say that but we need to see, and we also need to know, and none of us do, how salient it will be in 2029. How many people will be marching into the ballot box 4.5 years hence, with the removal of the winter fuel allowance 4 years ago still fresh in their mind. And you've got the question still of where would you go for the money instead? Because they go after the farmers, in asset terms, one of the richest constituencies in the entire country, and the same people have a hissy fit about that.
Well, you talk about the number of people who will be marching into the ballot into ballot boxes in 2029. Even according to Labour's own research, there'll be approximately 20,000 fewer pensioners because they'll die of hypothermia.
Well, yeah. Again, I mean, I know you're being light-hearted, but I don't.
I'm not. No, that's your mistake.
No, you are, because you just laughed.
That's not proof. That's not proof of being light-hearted.
But there's nothing funny about hypothermia, is the point that I'm making.
Exactly.
And obviously, if people do start dying as a consequence of losing their winter fuel allowance, then the electoral salience of withdrawing it will grow exponentially, and so it should. That's why the question of revision as opposed perhaps to reversal becomes acute. But again, I mean, I don't know, because part of the problem is that the conversation has been completely corrupted by the fact that when they go after the people with the most, the same people start squealing. Now, you claim that you're defending pensioners because they've got so little. Why are you defending farmers? Because they've got so much. So this pincer movement, quite a few of you having a crack at the question of why the right-wing media are already going so mad. And I haven't done it as a topic, but perhaps we should do, either later today or next week. But the idea that the newspapers know they're dying, a couple of you have pointed out, circulation's plummeting. They've got to get all their shots in early, because by the time the next election comes around, they're going to be even less relevant than they are now. Probably some truth in that. Breaks my heart as the son of a newspaper man, son of a newspaper man, but it is probably true. And other answers being they don't know what else to do. They're terrified by the size of the majority. What do you do if you've been cheerleading for Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Brexit and austerity for 14 years? What do you do? How can you possibly reach for the hysteria button when Keir Starmer turns up and doesn't immediately... Kemi Badenoch's whole shtick at the moment seems to be going after Keir Starmer for not having undone the mess that her party left behind already. How dare he not have fixed the problems? She said in response to yesterday's speech, they had 14 years to come up with a plan for what they'll do in government and they haven't done it. And you're like, they've been there for 5 months. And you're attacking them for not having already fixed all the problems that you created. As I told you, she's one of the greatest gifts to political journalism since Mark Francois. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. Thank you, mate. Didn't we have a call from Todd Morden? I'm sure there was a Northern call as well. I don't know if you're going to come on. Make sure you got your facts in a line before you start critiquing the programme-making process. But hey-ho. In the next hour, another element of this speech that I want to know more about. Already some council leaders have contended that they can't build more houses. Why is it so hard to build in this country? And I think in the first instance we need people who know what they're talking about.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11. So if you're ever wending your way through Worcestershire and you find yourself in the environs of the farm upon which I grew up, you will, in recent years, and certainly in recent months, have noticed what is essentially a whole housing estate going up about 2 miles shy of the lane down which I used to live. And I don't get back very often. It's probably finished now. People have probably moved in. But it really intrigued me, because one of the beautiful things about the house I grew up in was the view that it had. And don't laugh, but it had a view of the whole of Kidderminster. And it was beautiful because it's halfway up a hill and you have the whole town laid out. But you can even see the aircraft lights in Droitwich for people familiar with that part of the world. On a clear day, when you're up a hill, I know that there's no prizes for this. I'm not the first person to notice, but on a clear day, if you're up a hill, the view is extraordinary, right? And there were always stories. In fact, where Mum's living now, which is also very, very picturesque, but it's in a dell. So, or a dip, a valley, so it doesn't have views, big views. It's got beautiful little views. But even there is always talk about housing. They're trying to build houses on that field over there, or they're trying to build, or that farmer is trying to sell that land there, or the Ministry of Defence own that bit over there, and there's talk of it. It's always there. If you live in areas of space, if you live in the countryside, or if you live on the outskirts of towns, there are always stories in circulation about attempts to build on some of that land. And they're real stories. Just because it often comes to naught, or it goes away for 10 years and then comes back again, doesn't mean it's not true. There are attempts, there are plans to build. And I love the one that I just referred to, because it's not near enough my old house for me to imagine the impact it would have had if I still lived there. What if it was the field at the bottom of the garden? So you imagine a big old Georgian farmhouse that's been divided into 2 or 3 dwellings. We lived in one of them, but my bedroom's on the 3rd floor. So you look out at the back and you see the whole of Kidderminster ahead of you at the bottom of about half a mile of farmland. And I'm getting homesick now for a house that we haven't lived in for God knows how long, 30 odd years. And if you were building houses at the bottom of the garden, that would feel very different. And yet it's feasible. It's located in a place that would be able to access amenities very easily. It would have, as I say, it's really just the first bit of countryside on the edge of a town before you come through the farmland, and then you hit the old farmhouse where I grew up. So thank you. Michael says, can anyone else hear the Hovis ad music during this introduction? There's someone who grew up in a town, I suspect. Except the Hovis ad is in a town, of course, not in the countryside. But the hill, the view from the hill, I think you're right. You get that, right? So they're building on farmland very near where I grew up, but not quite near enough for me to think, I don't know about that. And the first thing you note, if you're being objective, is we really need more homes. We really need more housing. And a large part of that reason is because people are living longer. We also have the population needs to keep growing. In fact, the fact that people are living longer is one of the key reasons why the population needs to keep growing, whether you're going to accelerate the birth rate or accept the necessity of immigration. An older population that is not working needs to be subsidised and supported by a younger population that is working. And the older the population gets and the longer it lives, the more important it will be to import people to keep the economy pumping in a way that allows some of the spoils of a functioning economy to make its way back towards the pensioners, who obviously deserve it. But hey-ho, that's another argument that the Labour Party seem to be a bit scared of having at the moment. So you need housing. You need a growing population for economic growth, and you need housing. The Prime Minister today acknowledges some of what I have just said and directs, in an article for The Times, his impatience towards what he describes as NIMBYs and environmentalists. He's done a couple of things lately, which, for all the talk we had in the first hour about the infelicitous nature of yesterday's speech, that I think that there are rumblings afoot in Keir Starmer that could prove to be significant. It's a throwaway line about the Bat Tunnel yesterday. But if, like me, you're a student of really, really lazy right-wing commentary and really lazy but effective right-wing journalism, I've written an entire book about how easy it is to make people end up believing things that aren't true. And in fact, it's available for $1.99 for the whole of December on Kindle if you want to go and look up how to be right. But one thing you notice is how homogenous the enemy becomes. So one of my favourite stories in that book is about the councillor in Birmingham who realised they could save a few money if they left the Christmas lights up over a period of festivals that would encompass Diwali, Christmas and something else as well. And the money they saved by not getting up and down the lampposts every time they wanted to put some lights up was significant. So this councillor, whose name is out there, his name's in the book, comes up with a money-saving wheeze. And because, you're going to have the lights up even after one of the festivals is finished, they're going to be up well into the new year, so you can't carry on calling them the Christmas lights, and they're going to go up quite early. Let's call it Winterval. Let's just call it Winterval, stick the lights up, save a ton of money by not having to go up and down lampposts like a butcher's elbow, like a fiddler's elbow, trying to get the lights up and down. A poor fella who's still a voodoo doll into which right-wing columnists like to stick pins every Christmas. So a money-saving scheme formulated by a councillor to save a few quid and to mark several festivals became an attack upon Christmas. And it's still out there. It comes around even now. Even the Archbishop of Birmingham got involved because someone from the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph rang him up and slightly misrepresented the facts and said, "Isn't that awful, Your Grace? They're attacking Christmas." "That's absolutely awful. I can't believe they're attacking Christmas." So the ease with which people can be persuaded to believe things that aren't true feeds into this notion of homogeneousness. So if I tell you about a £100 million bat tunnel, which I have done, we did it on the show, a tunnel built to protect bats in the context of HS2 that costs in the region of £100 million, immediately huge swathes of the British public think that's lefty. It's a bit like woke. No one can ever really tell you what these words mean. Lefty, it's lefty, that lefty. No, I mean, no one thinks you should be spending £100 million on a tunnel to protect bats. Even most bats would be fairly outraged by the idea of spending £100 million on a tunnel to protect. Even Bruce Wayne thinks that that's an excessive amount of money to spend on a tunnel to protect bats. A cave, maybe, but not a tunnel. So that was Starmer's pushing back against some of that. So he went in on the bat tunnel yesterday. He's gone in on environmentalists. Lefty. Oh, lefty. Oh, muesli munch. Oh, natterjack toads. Now, great crested newts. You can't build any houses in this country because of great crested newts. Didn't help, of course, that one of the most prominent lefties of the last 20 or 30 years was also a newt enthusiast. I speak of the former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone. So he's gone. I like that. That's big picture politics. I think Starmer seems to be shrugging off and going to the trouble of shrugging off some of the clothes that have been put on left-wing politicians by everybody else. The presumption, oh, you're left-wing, you must be in favour of £100 million bat tunnels. Oh, you're left-wing, you must be in favour of whatever you want to call it, unlimited immigration. Oh, you're left-wing, you must be in favour of environmentalists. It's not true, but it's years since anyone's pointed it out. And they're in his sights. He talks about NIMBYs and he talks about environmentalists. He talks about houses and infrastructure being held to ransom. He talks about blockers and he talks about bureaucrats who he accuses of choking off economic growth. And of course, this impacts on the affordability of homes. If he succeeds in building anything close to the 1.5 million homes that he wants to build, that will have a huge impact on the sections of the population that want to own homes and currently can't. Ministers have been told to draw up laws to streamline complex environmental rules that can add millions of pounds to the cost of a development. Now, some environmentalists will be listening to this and worrying. And I understand that. But I think cautiously your worries need to be deprioritised. I don't think that I never felt that housing projects should be stymied because of the existence of a certain type of newt on the marshland. And this may sound a little bit biologically illiterate, but gather up all the newts and move them to some new marshland. 0345 6060 973. Can you gather up newts? No, I'm joking. Don't ring me on that. Well, you can ring me on whatever you want. So, what's it like? What's it like? Sam points out it's a tunnel, James. And it's a train has to go through the tunnel. So a cave would definitely not work. That's one of the crucial distinctions between a tunnel and a cave. And Sam's quite right. You couldn't have a cave in this context because then the train wouldn't be able to get out the other end of it. Or, depending on what direction it was travelling in, get into it in the first place. But we digress. The Bat Tunnel was interesting, but only as part of a bigger story. And the story is, how hard is it to build stuff in this country and why? you remember that lovely farmer? Like, his name will come to me during the break. He rings me every time we do this. He's probably off today. He's been trying to build houses on some of his land up in Manchester, just up outside Manchester, for about 30 years. Why is it so hard? All right? And you can come at this from whatever angle you want. 0345 6060973. I don't think that this is a sort of lazy tomato throwing exercise, is it? So some of the people motivated to, in Keir Starmer's words, hold infrastructure to ransom will be coming from a good place. But he's created an idea, if you read this piece in the Times, he's very much created the notion of jobsworths, that people are doing silly things in order to prevent houses being built. The rules are wrong. The pendulum, you know how much I love the analogy of the swinging pendulum. The pendulum has swung too far. It's too hard to build. I was certainly under the impression that an awful lot of stagnation in the building market was down to the building companies. The big building companies sell their houses for more, the more demand there is. And that's basic economics, isn't it? That's a capitalism 101. So they don't want to flood the market with new houses, because if they did, the profit they'd make on each new house would go down. That's one element of this conversation. But the big bit, as he promises to usher in a, quote, golden era of building, to fast-track 150 infrastructure projects and to get ministers to change laws, I want you to tell me what the problems are. 0345 6060 973. Mike's been in touch. Most important message of the day. You can gather up newts if you are appropriately licensed. I once visited a landfill site and found a man photocopying great crested newts. It's a living, isn't it? He was literally putting them on a photocopier and pressing print, because they apparently have a unique pattern on their bellies. Every day's a school day. I was only joking, but I always thought it can't be that hard to move some newts, can it? If you want to build houses on the old place where the newts used to hang out, move them to a new place. A new newt place, if you like. So how hard is it? I'm being a bit flippant, but this is a serious question. I want to build 10 houses on some land that I own. I want to build 200 houses on some land that you own. I want to build 1,000. I want to build a bunch of houses or a factory. I want to build something. How hard is it? 0345 6060 973. And why? Why is it hard? Who are these people? John in Leeds describes them as the Dilberts and the folder jobsworths at the local council. I like your language, but I want your details. I want your experience. What do they do? Do they turn up and go, oh dear, oh, that's 4 millimetres. Oh no, we've just found an injured deer. You're going to have to stop for 6 months. I don't want to exaggerate, but I want to know what the score is. And I'm going to have to rely upon people who have got some sort of experience in this field. And please, come at it from the other end, because Keir Starmer might be tilting at the wrong windmills. You might think that the environmentalist protections in this country don't go anywhere near far enough. You're terrified of the idea of house builders being given carte blanche to plough up precious ecosystems. But I want to know the reality and the detail, not the rhetoric and the rumour. 0345 6060 973. Mark suggests that the newts should be moved to a neutral location.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm not going to put you in idiot's corner, Matt, because I may have misunderstood your message. But Matt says, it's the usual nonsense. They're sticking up homes and flats everywhere. It can't be that much of an issue, can it? To which my response is, that's a bit like saying I've never had a cold, therefore I don't believe that the common cold exists. Just because stuff is being built doesn't mean that it's not very difficult to build stuff in other places and other contexts, Matt. Come on, mate. Try harder. So how hard is it and why? And of course, we need to include in this conversation the possibility that it's not actually that bad at all. And this is actually a touch of the old populism from Keir Starmer. Peter's in Woodford Green to kick things off. Peter, what can you tell us?
Hi, James. How are you? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
I was just... this sort of thing really rubs me out the wrong way, the way the system works. I mean, if you go in for planning... I've done this for a long time. You go in for planning, and they say, for example, no, we don't like that. We're gonna reject it. You'd be better off going for a pre-application. So, I've never been a big fan of pre-applications because they they don't tell you a great deal. So
Right.
I thought I'd had a discussion with a planner lately, and I said, look, I've never been a fan. They said, well, trust us. We'll do it the right way.
Yeah.
So you go.
These are quite small. Are these quite small developments that we're talking about?
No. This could be anything. So it could be 25 flats, which
Yeah.
I'm doing.
Okay.
It could be a single house, which I'm doing.
So give me an example of the wrinkles that you find ridiculous.
Okay, so
Like
a
a real life thing that's happened to you.
Okay, so I've gone in for planning on a house, which is quite a touchy site, but it's got an existing house there. It's next to a river.
Yeah.
It's in a beautiful part of Cornwall, and you approach Cornwall Council, and they say, so I don't like the planning system, so the pre-app system. So I've gone in for 2 houses to replace the one.
Right.
They've gone, that's overdevelopment, too much. Fine. So I go back, I say, okay, I'll get one house. Yeah, you'll probably get one house, but we really recommend the pre-app route. So without repeating myself, what I just said to you, so you go down the pre-app route, and then they say, no, we don't like that. Okay, what do you want?
And who are they? Who's they? Who are these people? Is it their full-time job? It's their full-time job. They're not councillors.
Yeah, the planner, chief.
And if I said to them, why are you doing that? What would they say? They wouldn't say, we just want to make Peter's life more difficult, would they? What would they say for the reason that...
Well, they don't give you a reason. So they say, we don't like that design. And I say, well, what do you want then?
Yeah.
Well, that's not for us to tell you. You need to come back with another design.
We'll know what we like when we see it, they say.
What's the point? Yeah. What's the point of having a pre-app?
That'd drive you nuts, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I said to this planner, I said to her, so this is like me dishing you up a dinner, and you saying I don't like that, and I go to you, well, what do you want then? She goes, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I said,
sounds like my wife. I don't mind. All right, let's have a Chinese. Oh, no, I don't want a Chinese. All right, let's have an Indian. Exactly, no, I don't want an Indian. I thought you didn't know what you wanted. You told me to. Anyway, we digress.
Maybe your wife should be a planner.
It's too busy. Far too busy.
They have other... I mean, I know you're short of time, but permitted development and prior approval is another thing. Which, so the government say we're going to give more permitted development. We're going to give more prior approval. And prior approval is like permitted development, where you go in and say, I'm going to change that shop into a flat, or I'm going to change that shop into 3 flats, or a pub into a flat.
Into a dwelling.
What the planners do then in the local councils, they then go, we don't want too much of that. So they then protect an area so that you can't go in and do that. So they'll allow permitted development and prior approval unless it's in one of their areas that they don't want that to happen, and they quickly put a fence around.
And so what you've got is an absolute absence of transparency and not knowing why on earth things are going on, which is why I do leave the question hanging for other people to answer, is if you sat a planner down now, and a planner can answer it, there will be a few listening, what would they say their reasoning was for doing the things that you described? Because they sound like exactly the people that Keir Starmer is talking about today when he talks about infrastructure and house building being held to ransom. This has made me laugh, and I don't know if it's going to make you laugh. So Freddie's been in touch. He says, get an architect to call in. He can explain what this fella is talking about. What do you do for a living, Peter?
I'm an architect.
I don't know why that tickled me. Daniel's in Manchester. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, I'm sort of coming at this from the opposite side to how Peter came at it, if I'm honest.
Yes.
So I'm a geoenvironmental engineer. So I'm worried about is being one of the environmentalists that
Keir Starmer is talking about. And you feel that would be a mistake to denigrate or dilute what you do.
Basically, recently I've been at a site, and I say recently, my initial visit at the site, so we go to site, we'll drill some boreholes, install some wells, look at what the soil is like, and potentially what ground gas is like coming out the site.
Yes.
Did an initial survey in 2021. It's all right. It's a little contaminated, so there's a little bit of arsenic and heavy metals in the ground and a couple of little nasties. But overall, it seemed all right. But there were a couple of anomalies with the ground gas.
Right.
That got raised by the planning people, and it's delayed the project by 3 years in order for us to plan out a proper GI or ground investigation that will give them an idea of exactly how bad the ground gas is. We've now gone back, we've done that, and we found significant amounts of ground gas at the site, which potentially we hadn't found in the initial investigation. It got flagged by the planning and by a slight risk assessment, that potentially we'd have, if they'd have piled into it and then they'd have put no protective measures in because they don't know what's going on, they'd have potentially killed people. And it's happened before in Scotland, where if you don't a thorough GI, you don't have a good risk assessment, you don't have a detailed idea of what's going on, people do die. So it depends on exactly what environmentalist.
Cool. I'm so glad you were listening today. Yeah, it really does. And clarity and detail, oddly, would be things that you and Peter agree on. Is that, he wants more clarity and detail, you want more clarity and detail. I don't think, at risk of trying to be King Solomon, I don't think you're necessarily at odds with each other. If someone had said to him, look, you can't do this because of all the poison coming out of the ground, potentially, I don't think he'd be ringing up LBC to say, and they stopped me from doing it, and I don't know why. And do you see what I mean? I don't think you're necessarily on opposite teams.
But what I'm worried about is essentially if we'd have taken the general risk assessment and GI that we did, and we highlighted it initially, and we went, it's potentially an issue, but it could be anomalous. Yeah. And the council bounced it back, and someone in the planning people went, we need to look into this.
Right.
If we'd have gone off of it, have been cases where people have sort of de-risked it through consultancy, and you've paid a lot of money to someone to essentially de-risk it to the point where they don't think it's...
Get it through. Like a Carl Hiaasen novel. I'm sorry, that's a bit niche, but doing terrible things just to get to get the buildings up so that you can sell them and get lots of money.
At that point, is the risk that people have died, and people have died before. So
one thing I need you to do is explain why it's 3 years, because lots of people are picking up on this, and no one has got the vaguest problem with what you've described as being problematic and needing it. But why would it take 3 years to do what you've described?
If I'm honest, that's partly a detail. Like you're designing a risk assessment from scratch. So we didn't have the in-house capability. We needed to go out to a ground gas expert for it.
Yeah.
Also, partly the planning took quite a while to come back, and that might just be a case of not many of them in the council to begin with. And they're massively overworked, and this was a massive project. So there was a lot of stuff for them to go through.
Does this fall under instructing ministers to draw up laws that would streamline rules that can add millions of pounds to the cost? Not bypass or loophole or abandon, but just make things... I mean, I'll believe it when I see it, but could it be filed under that rather than under something scarier?
It just depends what this...
Yeah. That's your point.
This is what worries me, is that we don't have clarity. So the day, my job is essentially to ensure that drinking water that people drink, that people are potentially planting.
We need to be aware of that. So it's really unhelpful. So I'm closing only because your phone line's gone a bit funny. I'm losing about 1 word in 4. But what you describe is really important and necessary work. And to conflate that with bat tunnels is really unhelpful and obviously potentially very, very dangerous. But no one's actually, and I know you know this, but you need it to be confirmed and clarified. No one's saying, why do we worry about, do you know what? You can't build some houses over there because some fella called Daniel's found loads of poison and arsenic in the ground and some nasty gases. Flipping it, just build a house on it. Use it like a plug so that the gas can't get through. No one's saying that, but you can imagine how someone as committed to their work as Daniel will worry when they hear a Prime Minister talking about NIMBYs and environmentalists in the same breath. That's unhelpful, because a NIMBY is motivated by selfishness or self-interest. An environmentalist generally is not. So that problem number 1, I think, score 1 to Daniel on this, is that's not a helpful conflation. Mick's been in touch. It's Newt Hour, this, if you're just joining us, finding more out about newts in the course of this conversation than you ever knew you needed to know. It is possible, writes Mick, to herd newts. An old colleague of mine worked on a site where the newts were being collected and moved to another pond. The heron who lived at the new pond could not believe his luck. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Joe, your mind works in exactly the same way. You'd fit in on this team, Joe. Why do you think Joe has texted the words red lorry, yellow lorry, red wind weather warning? Because Thomas Watt's struggling, or not struggling at all, but inventing a new tongue twister there. Amelia Cox says it slightly differently when she's got a red weather warning in her news bulletin. She says a rare red weather warning. And Thomas went for a severe red wind weather warning. If you knit the two together, you've got a brand new tongue twister. If you have to say a rare red wind weather warning really quickly, you won't get to the end of that sentence in one piece. I'll show you. A rare red wind weather warning. A rare red wind weather warning. A rare red wind. Right, that's everyone's going to have a go at that. Frank's in Tameside. Is that the Frank?
That's the Frank, the man from Manchester.
How long have you been trying to build?
This scheme has been alive for 10 years now. Right. Truth be told, it is the personal fiefdom of one Jonathan Reynolds.
Oh, okay. As in an MP. I just thought you were naming some poor fella in the planning department at Tameside Council.
As in the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry.
Oh, that's fair enough. He's fair game.
He is masterminding the Godley Green Garden Village, a 2,150 home development across 300 acres in Tameside.
Right.
As I say, it's been 10 years in the gestation, and from what I can gather, I think we're about 18 months off spades in the ground.
So why, in layman's terms, and you're a surveyor, and it's a farmer who owns some of the land that is in...
Yes, that's absolutely it.
I remember the details. So, Frank, thank you for ringing in today. Does it make your ears prick up when you realise I'm talking specifically about you in my introductions or not?
Well, I'm actually out in a car with an FM radio, so I can't listen to you.
So someone's alerted you?
My wife rang up and said, "Oi, they're on to you."
That's sensational. What's your wife's name?
Margaret.
Margaret, thank you, Margaret. I'm very grateful to you for your co-production contributions today. So, in simple terms, how on earth does it take 11 and a half years to go from...
listening to your chappie who's just been on,
yes,
he was using phrases like "people have died."
Yes.
But we're not adding the degree of risk into the equation. As a former railway surveyor, we reclaimed many, many acres of former coal sidings.
Yes, true.
And the planners used to go wild about arsenic contamination. Coal contains arsenic, but you'd have to eat about 100 tons of it to actually suffer any degree of harm.
I mean, he's going to ring back now and start picking you up on the science, isn't he?
Well, I'm sure he will, but like I say, at the end of the day, show me the site. If it's a gasworks, the contamination is going to be heavy.
So don't build on the gasworks.
Yeah, I had a 16-acre landfill on the farm.
Right.
And I watched it like a hawk to make sure that what went in was what they call inerts.
Yes.
As part of the lead into this scheme, an organisation from Trafford Park crawled over my land in amazing detail, drilling boreholes, taking trial pits, taking samples and analysing them. And we found possibly 2 locations where possibly one skip with some contamination had possibly been dumped. Right. The rest of it is as clean as a whistle. So all that we're talking about in terms of making the land fit for development is putting down 300 mil, 1 foot of topsoil to blind the site.
But none of this helps me understand the 11 and a half years.
Well, it's the time taken to
do all of this testing and so could it be done? Could the same stuff be done much more quickly, Frank?
In some ways, yes, right. Because in the main, this was agricultural land, 300 acres of it, yes. With only about 20 acres that had the possibility of risk. So don't get me wrong. Your previous caller was absolutely right. These risks need to be thoroughly examined and discounted if they are of no effect. The trouble is, it's like everything else. Everything is viewed as a potential risk rather than taking a view that, well, over 95% of the site, this problem doesn't arise.
Our job should be to make things happen. It's almost as if the emphasis is at the wrong end of the production process.
I mean, great crested newts.
Yes.
Yeah. Great Britain is great crested newt central because our climate and our land is a cracking home for great crested newts. The emphasis came when we were, and let's not say that word, but it was when we were part of Europe. And great crested newts are a protected and rare species across Europe. Because in somewhere hot and dry, like Greece or southern Italy, you won't find a one. But in Britain, you lift up a flagstone and there'll be a newt smiling back.
I see. So we're like Newt Central.
Yeah.
So it became so this could be the first Brexit benefit is that we don't have to worry about the newts. Well, I've been looking for a long time, Frank. Apart from my book sales, I haven't found any. But hang on, because Cabs Cross, he says, this is shocking, James, not you, Frank, me. The limiting factor on whether there's a species on a site is habitat. It's not about the newts or any other species. They're indicators of habitat quality. In this case, wetland, which after all filter our water and make us all safe. So you need to give your head a wobble.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the gestation of this particular site, there is woodland, there is special biological interest land, and all of that is being retained and protected in the development.
Right.
But if you look at the objective side of things, you get the impression that it is going to be 100% covered in concrete and brick.
Yes.
And all these habitats will be lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as if the mists are clearing with all of the contributions to this conversation, and you're not at loggerheads with each other. You're all moving towards the notion that the word streamlining is probably the most important word in what Keir Starmer has written in the Times today. The idea that not that things don't need to be done, but that they can be done much more effectively and much more quickly. Have you got any plans for when spade breaks soil finally? Have you got anything lined up? What are you going to do?
Well,
have a cigar? Have a glass of champagne?
Hopefully I'm still alive when it happens.
That's a prerequisite to my question, Frank.
I mean, I was 66 when this kicked off. You know how old I am now. So I've got to stay alive to see it happen.
Well, more power to you. More power to you. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, Margaret, as well, for making sure that Frank could contribute to this conversation, because that story is like the lodestone of this entire issue. I've been doing this job for so long now that I think of immediately of the best call I've ever had on a subject. And when we've nibbled at the edges of this kind of issue before, that length of time with ambition and a big project in place, that length of time is exactly what Keir Starmer is talking about. 20 to 12 is the time. You don't have to be Frank, though. Everyone's value. You could take over from Frank. You could be the best call I've ever taken on this subject. The new one. You could overtake Frank. You could push him into second place. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So what do you think he is talking about? And also, how hard is it to build? Because if it's not as hard as Keir Starmer suggests, and my feeling is it probably is, then it does get filed under unfeasible populism. Other things that we don't know the answer to. I heard a council leader on another radio station this morning talking about not having any land to build on. There is no grey belt. And then I heard Matthew Pennycook, who I thought was very impressive in interviews this morning. Really, so weird to have senior politicians, members of government, actually talking about real things rather than culture wars and weirdness. Just really trying to dig into the detail in quite a granular way. And he was saying there's no way that council leader could know because we haven't even designated what it is yet. How can anyone say we haven't got any grey belt when we haven't actually determined what grey belt is? That's interesting, right? I like that kind of political conversation. I also like this kind of political conversation. How hard is it? What is a NIMBY as well? Who's the NIMBY? How much power does a NIMBY have? A NIMBY doesn't have any power at all unless they're in the planning department at the council, surely. You sit there and they say they're building a housing estate round the corner and you go, well, I don't want them to. You can say, what happens? How does that process work? How slowly do those wheels move? Angela's in Sydenham. Angela, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a listener and I'm a strategic planner and I work for the government and my job is to look at how to accelerate housing delivery.
Wow.
And I think what I wanted to explain to you and to your listeners is that basically the last Tory government, In fact, the last 3 Tory governments, if there were 3, they got rid of strategic planning. And what that did, so they devolved all the decision-making down to the local level. And what that means is that if you want to build 5,000 new homes at the edge of a town, it gets down to local people to say yes or no. And what strategic planning does is it works out if you're going to build a new airport or a new waste incinerator or a new 5,000 homes or a new supermarket, it works out where to put all the big stuff, and it works out how to make sure you've got transport to all those new things that you're building. So if you don't have a strategic plan for an area, it's very hard then to work out where you're going to build a new home. And most local people, sorry to say, are NIMBYs. Nobody wants a new housing estate down the road from them.
Yeah.
So people will always say, no, I don't want it. But you have to have someone above that who can weigh up the benefits to the community. And that's what strategic planning does. And that's what Keir Starmer and what Angela Rayner are bringing back as part of...
You're confident of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know... So,
what would they be thinking then? It's probably Michael Gove, is it? If it was Michael Gove, everything he touches seems to turn to manure. What would he say if he was here now, apart from my Michael Gove? I'm fantastic. What would he say if you asked him, why did you do that? It's so obvious to people like Angela that this was a stupid thing to do, and she does this for a living. What made you think you knew better?
I think they thought that, I think it was a vote catcher. I think it was the politics of playing to the Tory shires.
Making it harder to build, so it was good news for NIMBYs.
Well, they didn't want all the people who own lovely...
I remember now.
Stuff out in the villages of Surrey and Sussex and Hertfordshire and whatnot. They don't want all of those new homes in the home counties, which is logically where you put a lot of them because people work in London.
Yeah.
So they created localism, which was this brilliant idea, but it just slowed everything down and clogged up the pipe. And then also on top of that, we've had 10 years of no growth. We've had really high inflation. So the house builders can't build at the moment because everything's too expensive. And all the planning applications and planning permissions that they had are no longer what we call viable, which means that they won't make any money if they build them. So the only way of making them viable is to make things taller and bigger and denser, more urban. And very few people in the UK outside the cities like that form of housing.
God, you really do know your stuff, as one would hope, given that you do it for a living. So you're
sorry if I'm boring you.
You are absolute. Whatever the opposite of boring is. Every call on this conversation today has been really, really brilliant because, unlike the presenter, you all know what you're talking about. So you're cautiously optimistic then about what you're hearing.
I mean, the bottom line is we don't have enough homes, and the big issue, we don't have enough affordable homes.
Yes.
And the only way, and within the affordable homes bracket, we don't have enough rental properties that are affordable. So we've got to solve the problem. There's no opportunity not to solve it. It's got to be done. And it's going to take a big collective effort across government and industry, and we just need to put our backs into it. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the Tories also starved all the local authorities of funding.
Yeah, so it's lose-lose. It's the worst possible case scenario.
So the local authorities are on their knees, a lot of them about to go bust.
That's right.
And because of Brexit, a lot of the planners who used to work in the UK have gone away. So we're short-staffed. We've got no funding. And as I say to people, if you go to a local authority now, it's like going to an NHS hospital. It's awful.
Yeah, it's 14 years of underfunding, and just what is it though? What was the plan? What were they expecting was going to happen if they'd stayed in power for another 5 years? Angela, thank you. And to add to everything that's come in so far, Hunt, the Economist, has been in touch to remind us to think about the process of building what Frank described, the public consultation alone. So you shouldn't necessarily balk at all of those 11 and a half years. Public consultation alone can take years. Then you need to get the services aligned with the project, delivery plans, national grid, water, gas, etc. You'll need some sort of infrastructure as well in terms of schools and health services, depending on the size of the project. So we shouldn't all go, what, how long? But if it was a smaller development, you could go, what, how long? And even with a big development, you speak to people like Angela and you realise it could be done more quickly. You just need the will. And the will hasn't been there, partly because of the flipping Gove attitude. We've had enough of experts. Oh, and here's something that's bad for the country, but hopefully good for Conservative MPs who all got voted out in the end anyway.
James O'Brien on LBC.
is the time. Work-life balance for men, for dads in particular. There's a really interesting story in the news today about a Goldman Sachs banker who has successfully sued his former employers, if that's the correct verb to use. He's won a sex discrimination dispute at tribunal. I think we're going to talk about that in the next hour, from all sorts of angles. Because if a woman taking maternity leave gets treated differently by an employer from a man taking paternity leave, it is actually sex discrimination, isn't it? Even though possibly if you're my age, your first reaction will be, well, of course, maternity leave is more important than paternity leave. And then there's the idea of going to your boss and talking about work-life balance and being, in this case, insulted. I think we'll probably dig into that. I've got a missing word round for you as well. I like this one, and it brings we're talking about councils. A lot of admiration for Angela coming in. John says, great to hear from your strategic planner. She's making a really good explanation of where we've gone wrong. It also explains why developments over the last few years haven't had the necessary infrastructure in place. A really great call, because this lack of infrastructure is what annoys people when developments are built. Basically, the Tories have allowed developers to get away with evading their responsibilities. And so maybe it's a doable, maybe it's a winnable. Of course, no one's mentioned the elephant in the room yet, which is all the tradesmen and women, all the workers, all the construction workers who quit these shores after people voted in 2016 to send them back where they came from. But maybe that's not the problem I think it could be. But here's your missing word round. Council spends £4,000 on metal Christmas tree filled with blank. Council spends £4,000 on metal Christmas tree filled with blanks, plural, actually. What do you reckon? Text it if you want to 84850. WhatsApp it to 03456060973, or you can blue sky me, actually, which is my social media platform of choice at the moment. Tim's in Chatham to steer us back to the question of why. Why does it always take so long? And is Keir Starmer right to have NIMBYs and environmentalists in his sights, and also in the same sentence? What would you like to say, Tim?
Hi, James. Good to talk to you again. We spoke a while back and you did tell me to slow down several times last time, so I'm going to attempt to regulate my speech
only because, and I don't remember, but I'm certain that the only reason would have been because you were being so brilliant and I was struggling to keep up with the full quantity of your brilliance.
You did say that, but I'm trying to keep my ego in check right now, so I will do what I can. Anyway, I'm going to echo a little bit of what's been touched on already about the planning department. There's one thing I find, I work as a designer down our way. We will submit certain schemes to local councils. There's certainly a lack of staff there, or certainly experienced ones to deal with them in some cases as well. Also, the other thing we find is that they've got local plan policies in place, which, whilst, say, central government are very much saying to people, you should be building and encouraging this, a lot of their policies seem to go in the opposite direction. And if anything, we find they tend to be almost sort of throwing us under the bus or finding reasons not to build.
Yes, that's
so
very much the impression we're getting, isn't it? It's, why do we think that is? Do they think that's their job, in your view?
There is a little bit of that going on, yeah. I mean, this sort of leads quite nicely onto my second point in some respects as well. I mean, I do this alongside, I actually work in building control, so I'm on the other end of the scale. I'm actually telling people what to do and what not to do and what's right and what's wrong sometimes as well. So
you're a poacher and a gamekeeper. You're a poacher and a gamekeeper.
That's one way of putting it, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, the other way, so what we've had since Grenfell as well is the introduction of the building safety regime as well, which means all the building control staff have now got to go through this exercise of registering at different classes of competence in order that they can check and deal with different schemes. And I think the upshot of that has been that a lot of people the industry or retired early or found ways out of it. So once again, we're certainly dealing with less experienced staff, not only from and lack of staff, not only from a planning point of view, but also from a building control point of view. We've certainly submitted applications recently, and we've realised that we're fairly comprehensive in our submissions, and in a lot of cases they're coming back with quite silly questions that we've already answered, and we've had to go back to the next.
So how would you improve that? And you've galloped away, Tim. You've galloped away.
Yeah,
no, I'm teasing you. What if under your glorious rule, what would you do first?
Under my glorious reign. Well, I think part of it's got to be down to actually simplifying it and actually saying, we've got to emphasise our priorities. What parts, could we possibly...
But it's doable. There are things here that you think could be done. Okay, when Keir Starmer talks about streamlining, that is the language you like.
There's very much so. I mean, I think sometimes, and I hate to sort of concentrate on planners and building control so much, but, I think they're very rigid sometimes and maybe... there and actually try and work people as opposed to...
This is what I mean by coming at it from the other end of the production process. It's a bit like lawyers in my line of work. There's two types of lawyers in my line of work. They're the ones, especially when I was on newspapers, who did everything within their power to get your stuff into the paper, and then the ones who were incredibly cautious and wanted to protect their own backsides by getting as much of your stuff as possible out of the paper and therefore minimising the... But the brilliant lawyers, the ones who were so confident of their own abilities, were the ones that would move heaven and earth to get as much of your story as you could into the paper on the extremely rare occasions when I was writing anything vaguely newsworthy. Before you go, Tim, as a speedy talker, I wonder if you'd mind having a go at our brand new tongue twister.
Yeah, sorry, you have to... Was this the red lorry, yellow lorry?
No, you need to say as quickly as you can, which in your case will probably be normal pace, a rare red wind weather warning.
Rare red wind weather warning.
It's nearly there. He wobbled a bit in a bit round of applause, I think, for Tim. A rare red wind. Amy's in Sheffield. Amy, what would you like to say?
A rare red wind weather warning, please.
That wasn't very speedy at all. That was just completely... That was like Thomas Watts' news bulletin. That was really careful. But anyway, that's not why you rang in. I might make you do it again at the end, much faster.
Oh, please don't.
What would you like to say?
I'm nervous. I'm an environmental health officer.
Okay.
And although I'm not doing that at the moment, I did work for 8 years in a contaminated land for a local council. So I'm one of the other cogs, if you like. You've had a planner.
Gosh.
You've had a developer. You've had people who work in building control. So I'm one of the other cogs. So my job as the contaminated land officer for the local council would be to look at incoming planning applications from your developer.
Yes.
I would decide on the conditions to place on those applications, and then it would go to the planners. And it ping-pongs back and forth. So the application goes to the developer with these particular conditions on, based on the condition of the land.
Yes.
And then they maybe do certain types of remediation work on a fairly simple site, one with minimal levels of contamination. And then eventually it comes back to environmental health. We sign it off, we're happy, and the development will go ahead.
Do you recognise that this process could be quicker or not?
Yes.
Ah.
I've had a career change 3 years ago, but nothing significantly has changed in that time.
No, clearly.
And the amount of time it took, and I got involved in some very, very complicated sites. There was a site not that far from me, from where I was working, which was considered to be the most polluted site in the whole of Europe.
Blimey.
And it's now, it's the Avenue Coking Works between near Bolsover.
Fair enough.
And it is now basically a mass of houses, and the land is safe and it's been remediated. I would have never have believed that was possible.
And how long did that take?
It took probably 2 decades.
Good Lord. So we're back to Frank in Tameside. But it needed to in this case. And also that land's not good for anything else.
Absolutely, no. And it was only through very, very clever chemistry and through very complex remediation methods that it was able to be remediated.
Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely. So everyone coming at this conversation, as you said, you were the missing piece of the jigsaw in a way. Everyone's in broad agreement, actually, even the people frustrated by the processes and the people working on the processes are in broad agreement that when the Prime Minister talks about streamlining things, it's both feasible and necessary.
And it shouldn't mean trading one thing for another. It shouldn't mean trading safety for efficiency.
And in fact, Emma messaged me very early today in this conversation, I haven't got around to reading it yet, about the binary idea that you're either for houses or for the environment. That's really silly, isn't it? The fact it's the idea you have to pick a team. I'm team house. I'm team bats. I'm team building. I'm team environment. It needs to be synergy. It needs to be synchronicity. It needs to be symbiosis.
But we live in a world where everything's very binary, that you're either pro or against almost everything now. There's the idea of, and if you're not, then you're considered to be sitting on the fence. And that's just ridiculous. You can have, if the local council don't impose conditions to make sure that land isn't developed when it's contaminated, you're faced with the prospect of that land having to be retrospectively dealt with, and
houses torn down, and I mean that's a best case scenario in the situation you described. The worst case scenario would be someone getting injured or damaged or dead. Thank you. That was brilliant. What an hour. It'll never catch on, this level of consensus, information and expertise. Michael Gove will be having an embolism.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. James writes, Robbie, you've fried my brain. I chortled at the beginning of Thomas's news bulletin, hearing the confident delivery of a rare red wind weather warning. It was confident, but it wasn't very quick, was it? I think Thomas bottled it. Like, obviously we can't be messing around with the news bulletins, but if he really went for it, a rare red wind weather warning. Where? Why does it where? Anyway, Robbie points out that this is not really something that I should be laughing at. We're not laughing at the actual rare red wind weather warning. We're laughing at the unexpected tongue twister that has appeared within our midst. But well done, Thomas. And while we're patting each other on the back, listen to these calls. These texts. How do you have so many brilliant callers? It's such a shame we don't get this on other media outlets, says Simon. Michael writes, a brilliant programme. It must be your production team, as no other programme has the same stand. Yep, that's absolutely right. Yeah, it is. Good show. Contributors have been great. I learned a lot. And Junan says, I'm tired of hearing from experts, James. Please, can you get Billy Buncher numbers on? I really need to know what he thinks too. As I said, it will never catch on. Okay, right, uncharted waters now, I think. I'm fascinated, as you know, by transformation. And I'm conscious, probably as a consequence of having had this job. Have you ever, I don't know what would I have been like if I hadn't carried on in this job? If I hadn't found this job, I may have turned into all the things that I currently don't like. If I'd stayed in newspapers, would I have had to adopt the clothes of a kind of right-wing columnist in order to make it? I honestly, I don't know. I hope not. I hope I'd have had the integrity not to. But I don't know. And that's why I'm conscious of the path not taken, as Robert Frost wrote. I took the path less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. But who knows where your life would have ended up if you'd made different choices or you'd had fewer options back in the day. But I'm fascinated by the way that society changes. There's a really good little thread on Blue Sky yesterday about this attempt to demonise human resources. Someone wrote a newspaper column, almost certainly a Brexiter, about we've got too much too much HR. And what it boiled down to is largely retired people who don't work anymore being very easily riled by the existence of jobs with titles that didn't exist when they were at work. So there's no real effort to find out whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Some of the titles, I grant you, can be a little bit verbose, but we didn't have that when I was at work. We didn't need a head of diversity and inclusion. Why do they have it now? This is ridiculous. So just things that didn't exist when you were younger that exist now are always negatives for a certain type of person. I don't know why. I mean, it's probably how they've managed to turn the word progressive into a pejorative. As if progress is bad. It's like do-gooder. As if doing good is bad. So this notion that all change must be, well, back in my day, we didn't mess about with this, or, we had 11-year-olds who were smoking 20 a day. It didn't do them any harm. Oh, why do I have to wear a seatbelt when I drive? You know the type, right? There's a lot of it about. It's arguably a growing constituency in the British population. But I'm the opposite. I'm always conscious of that initial reaction of negativity. Yeah, I used to indulge it quite a lot on the we didn't have that. It's ridiculous. Who needs this? You can't say it. But the world changes. Your children have different expectations from what you had when you were their age. They have different sensitivities and different sensibilities. They are very comfortable with things that you were not comfortable with, and they are very uncomfortable with things that you were comfortable with. People always forget that coin has two sides, you know? Homophobia, thankfully, has been in retreat in this country for years. But if you were to go back to the 1970s, when I was growing up, it was commonplace. You'd get jokes about it on the television. So your children are much more comfortable with diverse sexuality than you were when you were their age. This is a generalisation. Don't at me to say, no, I'm not. And vice versa. You know, they are uncomfortable with some of the jokes that you were comfortable with. So the world turns, the world changes. Can anyone remember whether I had strong views on paternity leave when I wasn't a father, or when I first became a father. I can't actually remember. But I think growing up in the model that I grew up in, where usually mum would stay at home to look after the children and dad would go to work, absolutely defines your gut reaction, your knee-jerk reaction to the idea of paternity leave. So there's a Goldman Sachs banker who's taken his former employer to tribunal. He was dismissed shortly after he returned to work after taking 6 months of paternity leave in 2022. He came back and believed and indeed told the tribunal that the bank disapproved of male employees taking extended leave to look after their children. And he said to the hearing that what happened to me would not happen to a woman at Goldman Sachs, 100%. The bank claimed his dismissal was a consequence of long-standing performance issues, but the tribunal disagreed. They found that Goldman Sachs had discriminated against John Reeves because of his sex when it dismissed him, and he will receive a payout. In other words, they contrived to get rid of him because he took paternity leave. When he told his managers after returning to work that he was struggling to balance work and family life. This is fascinating, you know. So a banker, and at places like Goldman Sachs, you're almost defined. I don't know if you've watched Industry, one of the box sets on the streaming platforms at the moment. I can never remember which platform stuff's on. But, you know, these are the kind of institutions where you're supposed to keep a clean shirt in your office drawer so that you can put it on in the morning after pulling an all-nighter. We work hard, we party hard. So that culture in the city, albeit that he was in compliance rather than one of the more aggressive departments, it's still very much defined, or it can still be very much defined by this notion of what was the Masters of the Universe, I think was the phrase that Tom Wolfe used when he wrote about these people in Bonfire of the Vanities. You are defined by the prioritization of work over everything else. I remember when friends of mine went into the city, particularly into law firms, and the hours that they'd be expected to put in. And you'd sometimes, a bit like the planning conversation we had in the last hour, you'd say, do you really need to do this many hours? And they said, that's not the point. If you're not there, you're out of the running. If you're not there, you're noticed. But do you need to be at the end of a phone at 3 o'clock in the morning? And sometimes if you're dealing with America, you're working by their clocks. But it was like the culture of compliance. With this idea that the job is everything. So I love the idea of a man who, I presume, given the age of his children, is younger than me, walking into this environment and having the cojones to say, I'd like a work-life balance, please. I don't want to be absent from my children's upbringing, and having taken 6 months of paternity leave off, I wouldn't mind a little bit of help in coming to a better accommodation. He was told by his managers, and this was quoted in court, "You're a grown man, you can sort this out," telling him, in other words, to man up. They would describe, both his managers, one man, one woman, were described as being dismissive of him having difficulty as a man in balancing childcare with work during lockdown. So obviously, because he was a man, his managers thought that it was his wife's job to be dealing with the childcare during lockdown. So there's another trope that used to be commonplace and is becoming less so. It's still obviously going to be the case in the majority of families, even when both parents are working, that the bulk of responsibility for arranging or providing childcare will fall to mum, but it has to change. It's an inevitable consequence of these social changes that we're seeing in the workplace. When he had his second child in 2021, he told his bosses he was going to take 6 months paternity leave. And then when he returned, while he was on it, his name was put forward for redundancy. He was informed he'd been placed at risk of redundancy and was adamant that this was a consequence of him having taken paternity leave. So 14 minutes after 12 is the time. I just want to know what happens, really. I got 2 weeks paid. It was a different company, though. It was owned by different people. They gave me 2 weeks off, and I don't get paid when I'm not here. The nature of my contract is such that we don't get paid. The presenters don't get paid when we're not here. But they paid me for a fortnight when my first child was born. I can't remember what happened with the second one, actually, but it was also box fresh and so new. And at the time, we're going back, would you believe, 18 and a half years now, nearly 19 years in January. Can you believe that? Do you remember that minicab driver who rang in to Alison, who was doing my holiday cover 19 years ago in January, to announce he'd just picked me up at Hammersmith Hospital and I'd had a little girl? It was an amazing little moment of local radio magic, wasn't it? Maybe you had to be there, but I was. So you can imagine how much it's changed. So 19 years ago, I felt like I felt like not a superhero. What's the word I'm looking for? I felt really, really well looked after. That they voluntarily, because they didn't have to give me anything. I don't know what I could have taken off unpaid, but radio's a weird business. I don't think we can use my job as a lens through which to examine everybody else's. But just that idea of what's changed in the last 20 years, that I was so grateful, and they went so above and beyond what was expected or required of them to give me 2 weeks fully paid off work to start. I'd have taken it unpaid, but I wouldn't have taken more than a fortnight. Wouldn't have crossed my mind to take more than a fortnight. What's it like being a man? We don't do many phone-ins about being a man. We do lots of phone-ins about the experiences of women, because that's the area in which the changes are more profound and more obvious. And so by definition, they're generally more interesting, but not on this one. Not on this one. What's it like? I mean, how is paternity leave viewed in the workplace? Is it viewed as being somehow effeminate when they tell him to man up because he wants to work harder on his work-life balance? And men or women can answer the question of what happens when you ask an employer, what's the world like now in the context of these phrases that have become commonplace but whose meaning is not immediately clear? What happens when you ask your employer for help with the work-life balance? And the key point here is one that, it doesn't pop up very often, does it? This is an area where men are discriminated against. I don't like it when we're doing a phone-in about misogyny or about women being victims of various things, and men start queuing up to tell me that it happened to them too. I just don't think it's helpful, and I think it's mansplaining, and I think it skews the conversation. This is the opposite. This is actually a really weird zeitgeist moment where men are being discriminated against, and in a very specific area, and that area is parental leave and work-life balance. Women get a terrible time, have done for years. Women get discriminated against. Of course they do when they have babies, when they take time off, when they want to come back part-time. The media is terrible for that, actually. But this is a man who wants to do the right thing by his children and is essentially receiving a message from his employer, A, that he can't, and B, that makes him somehow less of a man. And I just want to know how widespread that is. What happens? What happened when you asked? What happened when you tried to get paternity leave? And you don't need a personal involvement in this, because it's a brand new subject, this, for me. I've never done it before, which is why I haven't got my crystal-tipped needle question quite correct. But it's true, isn't it? This is sex discrimination against men in the workplace as a consequence of the changing nature of relationships with employment. Why shouldn't a man have as much access to parental leave as a woman? Why shouldn't a dad have as much access to parental leave as a mum? So has it happened to you? 0345 6060 973. This man, writes Sophie, is a feminist. Women won't be able to juggle work and family until men are able to. That's such a clever point. You know, everyone benefits from the sharing of responsibility. You've got an equal stake in the child. You should have an equal stake in the childcare if you're both working. I know exactly, writes Craig, what is meant by this discrimination with paternity leave. I took shared parental leave with my partner, where we took 6 months off each, and this story is incredibly pertinent, so I shall continue it after the hiatus. But this is, come with me on this one. I haven't got the question 100% right. I'm saying this is sex discrimination, isn't it? And I'm saying, what's it like to be in the mid, but you know where we are. You know what it's about. The quality of the text coming in is high enough for me to be confident that I've pushed enough buttons for you to have a fairly clear idea of what I'm talking about. But I'm fully conscious of the fact that I haven't pushed all of them yet. 12:19 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Pioneers and feminists, as Sophie said. So Craig writes, I was 6 months off each. I was the first man to ask for this, and I could feel the frustration at work in arranging and organising the parental leave to work out the things like staggered pay, etc. My partner is a teacher and makes much more than I do. So if our daughter is ill, she has Down syndrome and is prone to seasonal illnesses, I'm also the one who takes time off to care for her. I've faced plenty of stick for taking this time off, which I wouldn't trade for anything, ranging from comments like, you've only just had 6 months off after putting in annual leave requests, to colleagues asking why I'm getting so much time off. I sometimes use my holiday allowance to cover illness. And my managing director talking to me about being on that effing paternity leave. And that wouldn't I'm not saying it doesn't happen to women. Women get a tough time of it when they have children in the work. We know that. But this is new. Or at least it's new to us, the idea of men asking for it and not and getting sexually discriminated against, because the reaction a man will get when he talks about parental leave is going to be completely different from the reaction that a woman gets. Chris writes, 1 week paid in the UK for my son, moved to Germany, got 5 months at 65% of my salary when we had our daughter. Night and day. Isn't that fascinating? And Catherine points out, I don't know this, whether or not the gentleman from Goldman Sachs is in a same-sex marriage or an opposite-sex marriage, because of course 2 dads can have a kid these days, and well, it can always been able to raise a kid, but it's more commonplace. So the tribunal has got it right. It's nothing to do with gender. It's about being a good egalitarian parent. Good on him. It's a really good point. And Terry says, my husband worked in finance. We were both working full-time but struggling to care for our children, one of whom is disabled. He tried to reduce his hours and was just told no chance. So he quit and now works part-time at Tesco. He is much happier. It's really interesting, this, and I know nothing about it. The world of parental leave for dads, the world of paternity leave, and the unpleasantness you face in the workplace, or the pleasantness, I'd like some positive stories, when you ask for it. Curtis is in Stevenage. Curtis, what would you like to say?
Yeah, afternoon, James.
Hello.
Long-time listener, first-time caller, and yeah, fascinating topic. So just to preface it, my son was born on the 30th of October.
Gosh, congratulations.
Thank you, yeah, little man's doing great.
Sure.
So my firm, very generous 4 months paternity package for men, had to be taken within a year. So I took the whole of November off with mum and family, had a great time, and then returned back to work this Monday for my first day back. So again, I work for a large US investment bank in London.
Gosh.
Very crunchy part of the business, client-facing, fast-paced, all that stuff. And look, I've had a brilliant experience. My firm, the leadership I work with have been fantastic. Asking how I've been, how's mum been. First week back, regular checkings. How have you been getting on?
Really?
Is your portfolio?
So the polar opposite of what this fellow experienced at Goldman Sachs.
I couldn't have had I couldn't have more of a different experience than what he had. And look at the local culture within the team in terms of how I've been received, especially the men. So I've had to go on 3 months. I'm about to have January to March off shortly as well for the second part of my paternity leave. Again, great. The men and women on the firm are like, it's brilliant. At home, switching at 180. Me and my wife are a lot more relaxed. There's no anxiety there. There's definitely an element of reassurance of my employer that
this is really important, because otherwise you'd be worrying about falling behind or missing a promotion or losing a commission. But if the employer wasn't actively encouraging of it, then men might not do it even though they were entitled to, because of that internal dialogue I've just described.
100%. 100%. And I've been a huge beneficiary of that, where I've had great transparency with my leadership in the London office.
Gosh.
And yeah, long may it continue. So
this guy's quite brave in a way to take on this battle when he could have just not sought to do what he wanted to do for his family. He could have kept his head down and done what we've done in previous generations, what a lot of people who might be responding negatively to this story are doing so, even though they often don't realise it, because they're resentful about the fact that he's not going to have to suck up what they had to suck up when they became fathers or when they became parents. And that's why Sophie, I think, called him a hero, because he's tackling something that is not easy to tackle, and you're a kind of beneficiary of battles that have gone before, or of realizations within your company that you can't. It's not enough just to offer it. You've got to bloody mean it.
Yes, 100%, and mean it with conviction, and have that support there for them. So,
well, you're a poster boy. You picked the right investment bank, didn't you?
Yeah, they're great. They're one of the good ones. They're brilliant. So, yeah.
27 minutes after 12. Good luck with it, Curtis. Jealous? Little bit jealous. I'd love to have spent 3 months at home when mine were born. I just would love to, especially now one of them's gone. One of them's left home, gone away to university, and you just don't. You sometimes say no one tells you how quickly the time goes, do they? And then you remember, everyone tells you that actually, but you just think they're really boring. So everyone tells you how to. So I will have said to Curtis then, mate, take them, because seriously, blink and he'll be off to university. Just stop, pause for a minute, pour yourself a drink, and that's it. They've gone. They're off to university. And everyone warns you that that's going to happen, and none of us ever pay the blindest bit of attention. John's in Maidenhead. John, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, John. What's on your mind?
So there's a bunch of stuff that's already in legislation that people aren't aware of.
That's very true.
Aware of.
Yes.
And then there's a whole bunch of culture stuff. So I'll start with something that sounds a bit odd, but the more people chew on it, the more you realise it's true. Is that the best thing for women's rights that could happen would be to give men exactly the same maternity pay as they get.
No, I don't think that's odd at all. That's what Catherine was saying, is that it's a feminist move, this, because you cannot successfully juggle it until you're doing it equally, until you're actually got double bubble juggle, to coin a phrase, where the man and the woman are in more or less identical situations. Everything's going to improve.
Yeah. So what then happens is it will inevitably force an equalisation of all sorts of other things, because suddenly you can't just say it's women of a certain age or it's men of a certain age, whatever. It would be a massive, massive proportion of the workforce that are paying for everything. And then secondly, for me, I found out a couple of days before I had to declare it, because it was X amount of weeks before the birth, that there's something called shared paternity pay. Yes. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but it's the ability to take the 52 weeks allowance that the mother gets and actually split it with the parents. So we worked out, because of our situation, that we weren't going to be able to have my partner off for the whole of the 52 weeks because of just financial reasons. So we were like, okay, so let's work out what we can do. And it ended up with me, I think I took 11 of her weeks in the agreement with the company, and they were gentle enough and generous enough to let me spread it. So I had 1 week in 1 month, the next month, the next month, the next month.
It's going to depend slightly on what your role is, but equally,
for sure,
a company that pushes back against it because they think it's not possible probably haven't done enough work on calculating whether or not it might be possible.
But what happened is, by doing like that, I spread it so that 1 week a month meant it didn't affect my team, it didn't affect too many things, it didn't affect the projects I was involved in. It mitigated it while giving me a whole week every month to help. And then we built up to a summer where I had multiple weeks off in a row. We essentially had a summer together with a newborn, and it was incredible. But part of all of that was also a shift in time to, and spoiler alert, nurseries are expensive, more than you'd imagine. So the both of us did a reduced week of 5 days in 4, having a day off each. Now, my partner, unfortunately, has had to go back to full 5 days in 5. I've managed to maintain that, and my daughter's just turned 3, and I've had a day off a week with her every single week.
You lucky so-and-so. How does it play among your peer group? How does it play among your peer group?
I'm like the only one. I'm the only one that has anything like this.
Yeah, so this is the pioneer. That's why I use the word pioneer, because this has to become the new normal, doesn't it? I can't see any other alternative.
It's just amazing. Like, I think I might have struggled to be a different parent to what I experienced growing up without that. But like my day off a week, my holiday a week with her, it's the hardest day of the week, 100%. solo parenting, like whatever,
but also
whatever
the most
I was
rewarding.
taught.
Also the most rewarding.
For sure. Like the relationship, the things, the knowing the routine, the knowing what she needs and how, and then when you add that to trying to unlearn systemic or kind of built-in responses that I'm learning. The more I learn, trauma responses, or you just want to shout because that will fix it, because that's what happened when I was a kid. And that's so hard.
Oh, mate.
It's so hard to unlearn.
I didn't think you were going to grab me by the feels in the course of this conversation. Well done. Seriously.
Well,
you're breaking a cycle there, aren't you, John?
It's trying, and it's really difficult, and it's really difficult at the same time as trying to then go into work. And recently I learned, I didn't realise this was happening, but I started to smell a kind of something wasn't quite right. It turns out my work had perceived that because I work less days but same hours, they were like giving me less things to do consciously, because from their perspective they feel like I'm not there for a whole day, but actually I am there. I'm just there
that's what
2 hours before them and 2 hours after them.
That's exactly what culture change means, isn't it? And yet, again, sometimes the language is unhelpful, and it certainly alienates people. What do you mean culture change? We didn't have culture changes in, but you're talking about a change in culture, and you're at the forefront of it. And other dads in the future will be grateful for the efforts that you've made. And that's why John Reeves, the Goldman Sachs banker at the centre of the story that's inspired this conversation, is indeed not just a hero for men, but as Catherine and others have pointed out, and as John alluded to, a hero for women as well. Because, and I'm talking now about couples, opposite sex couples, but which is the majority child raising scenario in this kind of context, because if one partner is having to do much more juggling than the other because the other is not allowed to juggle, then everybody loses. I'm a little late for the news, but it probably will contain a variation on this new tongue twister that we have stumbled across this morning, a rare red wind weather warning. And this is the first time, I think, in the latest Storm Dara, that we will have heard Amelia Cox have a crack at it.
Forecasters have issued a rare red weather warning for wind as storm.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:36 is the time. I think you might be paying even more attention to the news bulletins than you usually do as a consequence of Tongue Twister Watch. But yes, Ross writes, did Amelia just say slapping therapy? Yes, she did. It's a hideous story, that, which... if you're so minded, I would encourage you to find out a little bit more about. And James points out that in some ways the second story was almost as much of a tongue twister as the first. David, paying attention to other parts of the programme, writes, don't forget the missing word around James. Is it would? No, it's not would, and I won't forget it, and I will reveal it shortly. Tony points out, OMG, you've definitely got into the newsreaders' heads now, James. You can tell that they're really concentrating when they get to that bit of the bulletin. No one's done it really quickly yet, though. A rare red wind weather warning. A rare red wind weather warning. I do not know. On the paternity leave, we've had too many positive stories. I want some negative stories. I'm trying to imagine what would have happened back in the day, but even now. So we know there are negative stories because of what happened to this Goldman Sachs banker, but of course Curtis, also working at an American investment bank, having a lovely experience. So we want to know about the idea, as Craig told us, that that it is making your life at work worse. You demanding your rights to raise your children, your rights to be a better dad, exercising your rights to be a better dad, make it harder at work. 0345 6060 973. Before that, I'm sure, like me, you are in need of some clarification about the unfolding situation in Syria. Thousands fleeing as rebels now close in on a third major city. This is the city of Homs, as rebel fighters push further south with their rapid assault on government forces. Oz Kataji is a British-Lebanese journalist who spent 13 years covering the war in Syria, as well as the war in Ukraine, which is where he was last time we spoke to him. But I thought he'd probably be best placed to give us a bit of a steer what's going on, because Oz, in the first instance, because it appears that Bashar al-Assad is on the receiving end of a bit of a kicking, there's a tendency or a temptation to think, well, this must be unalloyed good news. But as ever in Syria, or as ever even perhaps in the Middle East, things are rarely that simple.
Well, yes. I mean, look, to be honest, I rarely come on your show and give good news. But for once, I'm going to, pivot away from this and say, actually, I think what's happening I wouldn't call it unalloyed good news, but but it is good news. Look, I'll quote or paraphrase Robert Ford, the former US ambassador to Syria, to explain in very basic terms what people should be looking out for at home, and that is refugees, or rather the internally displaced in Syria. Are the internally displaced in Syria fleeing these new areas to head to the regime, or are people fleeing regime areas to head to these areas? And that's the answer. The answer is people are fleeing the regime areas to move to opposition-held areas. That's the only question that really needs to be asked about whether is this good news or not in this particular instance. Now, let me go into more detail on this group, HTS, which are leading the offensive. They are not the only group involved, but they are taking charge. They are undoubtedly Islamist in nature. The leader used to be a member of Al-Qaeda before disaffiliating, disavowing Al-Qaeda, and then over the last 6-7 years or so has been using his military power to stamp out Al-Qaeda and ISIS cells that exist within opposition-held areas. That doesn't mean that this guy is now suddenly, the most profoundly interested in defeating Salafi jihadism or anything like that. He's not. But I think there needs to be more nuance in understanding what's happened. What's happened in Syria, there's a lot of history has happened over the last 8 years where most people probably stopped paying attention to Syria around 2016. This group has gone under a remarkable transformation, trying to move itself away from the Islamist structure that destroyed the Syrian revolution. The Syrian revolution was destroyed by the Islamists taking over or sort of winning out from the secular forces, and the West took a look at this and said, we don't want anything to do with Islamist governance, so we're not going to support this, etc., etc. Over the last 8 years or so, HTS has been effectively governing most of Idlib, including Christian parts of Idlib. And over that time, they have had to go over a change. Now, for HTS to be putting out statements that they are, over the last few days, they've taken over areas with Ismaili populations, Alawite populations, Christian populations, Kurdish populations. And every time they do this, they release a statement saying the Kurds are one of us, the Ismailis are one of us, we're all one people in Syria. To even release a statement about it. Now, your audience may sit at home and think, well, they're just saying that. How do we know if why they could just be lying? You're right, they could just be lying. But there is more than just these statements. There is the way they've governed in parts of Idlib. I'm not saying they're Democrats. They are authoritarian.
But neither are they the Taliban.
Absolutely not the Taliban. And that's the point that I'm trying to make.
Well, you have
for them to even to make these statements at all would be considered apostasy by Al Qaeda and ISIS. Just writing the statement that these people are one of us. Yeah,
I hear you. So it's still fingers crossed, but there's hope there as well as some evidence and grounds for hope. What's left of what was once known as the Free Syrian Army then, Oz?
So they've been incorporated. I mean, there are still fighters who fought for the Free Syrian Army from Western supplied brigades who are now part of this HTS offensive,
right?
Including people I know quite well. And let me tell you, these people are not Islamists at all. They are fighting with the strongest faction because they believe it's the course to liberate their country. And we can have all of these conversations about what the future of Syria looks like. Will it have an Islamist governance? Will it, etc., etc.? But the only future for Syria that can include all Syrians is one that the Assad regime no longer governs. So toppling the Assad regime has become the absolute.
We need to get Oz back. I just want to get, because I'm going to do this because it's a superb joke, and you might not be expecting many jokes in the context of the conversation that we're having. But Tony and Bishop Stortford listening to Oz Chatterjee describe the. Oz, you might appreciate this. I hope you do. Tony and Bishop Stortford is wondering whether the leader that you've just described as having undergone a severe moderation of his previous views. Tony writes, perhaps he's had a road to Damascus moment, which is oddly pertinent, given that my next question was going to be about momentum and what was likely to happen next.
Well, yes, as I said, look, it's not just HTS involved. Now you've got the more secular democratic elements in the south. They've just announced an operation room today. The SDF, the Kurdish guys, have been allied with the regime for so long. They're now taking regime areas. Like, everyone seems to have decided that they're sick of Assad and that they want to come together for some kind of agreement. Now, the SDF, the Kurdish left-wing forces, they seem to have come to an agreement with HTS, the Islamists. Now, that would be unthinkable if I was talking about Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It would be unthinkable. But HTS and the SDF are looking at HTS and thinking, we can make a deal with these guys. These guys aren't the be-all and end-all of the end of the world kind of thing. So I think people need to look at that with a sense of nuance.
You think the clock is ticking for Assad then? I mean, 100%. He's wriggled off bigger hooks than this in the past, perhaps.
He has, and I'll tell you why very quickly why he can't do it this time. It's because he relied on Iranian militias from Iraq, from Lebanon, and on the Russian Air Force, and he has neither of those two things because of what's happened from October 7th onwards with Israel striking Iranian militias and with the war in Ukraine, which means that Assad's most powerful allies are now very, very busy dealing with a whole lot of other stuff, and they can't rush to his aid anymore. And you're seeing the consequences of that. And I have to say that if you think that a dictatorship that, not you personally, but a dictatorship that requires foreign militias and foreign support to just stay alive is a sustainable thing, then you're very bad at foreign policy. And this was the kind of idea in the West that, okay, the Islamists are bad, but maybe Assad can stabilize. And this has been completely proven catastrophically wrong by the events of the last few days. All of this didn't have to happen. We could have dealt with this in 2013, got rid of Assad and tried to build a democratic Syria. We didn't do that. Now the Western powers have nothing to say about what's happening. What's happening in Syria today is a Syrian decision led by Syrians about Syria. And the West, the USA, Britain, France, we have nothing to say about this anymore. It's none of our business what's happening in Syria anymore. We decided that the status quo of Assad and 3 million people living in under constant bombardment in Idlib was the preferable foreign policy outcome. That's what we decided to settle on. Syrians had enough of that. After 8 years of being bombed and ignored, they were like, nope, we're going to take back our country. That's the consequences of what's happening now, the consequences of our failed foreign policy decisions, thinking that Syrians should just suck it up and live under Assad. Well, they said no, just like they said, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, when they took to the streets. They've said the same thing again. The Syrian revolution isn't over. It's not dead. In fact, it's being reborn in front of our very eyes. And Assad is in an even more dangerous moment for his regime than he was at the height of the revolution 10 years ago. So it's an incredible story happening. And I know people are going to be concerned. They're going to be concerned about what happens to minorities. They're going to be concerned about lots of things they have valid concerns to be about. But I just need to ask them to please go and read what's been happening in Syria for the last 8 years. Go and read people who've gone to HTS-controlled Idlib, who've spoken to the leaders there, there is so much reporting about what's happened since then that will at least give you a more nuanced understanding than thinking all Islamists are bad. And again, I'm a secular Democrat, so I think all Islamism is bad. I just have to say a lot of Syrians right now feel very, very hopeful. I've never seen such hope in my Syrian friends, and I'm talking my atheist, Christian Syrian friends. All of them feel hope now under the HTS, and in a way they would never have felt in previous years.
What a brilliant report from Oz Chatterjee, says Alan in Dover. And before you go, just to be clear, when Homs falls, that leaves no major cities between the rebel forces and the Syrian capital, to go back to Tony and Bishop Stortford's joke, the Syrian capital of Damascus.
I think we are very possibly looking at the end game for Assad.
Wow.
Right now, things can change very quickly,
of course,
but I don't know where he's going to get his support from that will turn the tide
to
back.
push back. Oz,
Damascus is next.
Damascus is next. Oz Chatterjee, thank you very much indeed. 12:48 is the time. Oz, as I mentioned, a British-Lebanese journalist who spent 13 years covering, among other things, because of course he was on the ground in Kyiv not long ago, covering the war in Syria. It is now 12:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the changing nature of paternity leave, parental leave, is a cause for cautious optimism, albeit that the story that has drawn our attention to the issue very much a sign of how things used to be. A Goldman Sachs banker being told, "You're a grown man, you can sort this out," when he told bosses he was struggling to strike a work-life balance, and the tribunal finding that his dismissal was sex discrimination because what happened to him would not have happened to a woman at the same company. Russ is in Snodland. It's rather gloriously named, part of Kent. Russ, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. This story hit quite hard. I was driving and I thought I need to phone in and get in touch with this because I've had a situation before where my little one is 16 months old now.
Yeah.
And I was forever told when I was growing up that there was a chance I could never have kids. So obviously finding out that I was going to have one was probably like the proudest moment of my life.
Gosh.
I went to work somewhere where I was closer to home, so obviously if anything was to happen with the missus, I could go home quick and, sort out whatever's going on. And when I was getting close to the due date, I was in and out of work and hospital, because obviously the missus was being looked at to make sure if everything was all good.
Yeah.
Work were really supportive. They were like, yeah, if you need to go, get out, go, whatever, great. My missus was induced on a Thursday. And we were told, like, the baby is coming tomorrow regardless of what's going on. So I went back to work, said to him, look, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I'll be off for 2 weeks because baby's going to be born.
Yeah.
And suddenly work completely changed.
Oh, no, I thought it was going to be months later. This was in the moment of imminent delivery.
In the stroke of about an hour, I've gone from being really supported to...
Why do you think that was? Because it couldn't have taken them by surprise, could it? They had 9 months. They had 9 months to get ready for it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's what shocked me. I mean, fortunately, I worked with two different bosses, and one of them was good as gold. The other one was a bit more out for himself.
Old-fashioned.
Selfish, and I don't mind it, but it's the fact that the baby was born on the Friday, and I hadn't heard a single thing until Sunday afternoon when I got, are you coming into work tomorrow?
Oh, really?
And I literally said, well, no, my baby's just been born.
Yeah.
So I was told by one boss, have a couple of weeks off, go and spend some time with your child, enjoy your time, blah, 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 because obviously, like you said earlier, time is short.
Yeah.
And it really
you know nothing.
Honestly, I've got a 16-month-old going on 16 at the moment, I think.
Oh.
But so one was really supportive, but the other one really didn't care.
What did you do?
If I'll be honest, I literally, in the space of about a week, I'd gone from being really happy to being really depressed.
Yeah, I bet.
And I literally had to turn around and say to my boss, I am not coming back in.
Right. So
I never went back into that workplace ever again because I got so drilled into the floor. I mean, even when I was off with the baby on my own.
It's the stress. It's the stress and the worry of it all, and also the anger and the sense of betrayal and the confusion. Yeah, I think you did the right thing, and it sounds just, I don't know what you normally sound like, but you're sounding pretty upbeat now. So
it's a double-edged sword because unfortunately on Saturday I lost my dad, so it's a bit of a kick.
Oh, mate, I'm sorry. Well, at least he got to meet his grandson, eh?
Yeah, well, he got to meet his granddaughter. I was happy with that, so that's all that matters.
Yeah, granddaughter.
It was more the fact that I had to leave was more driven by the fact that I just seemed like I was really supported, and then I just became a number.
Well, you're the perfect example of what we're talking about: the good and the bad, and no offence, the ugly. Can I ask you a personal question? Do you mind?
Yeah.
Why were you told growing up that you wouldn't be able to have children? You don't have to tell me.
I had an operation when I was really young, around the special area, as we like to call it.
Yes, indeed, do we?
The doctors basically turned around and said, look, there is a chance later in life you will never have kids.
Gosh.
And, now I've got one. I'm onto it. I'm like, yes. So,
Russ, take care, mate. And I'm so sorry for your loss. It's far too soon for words of comfort to go anywhere near addressing what you're feeling at the moment. But there will come a time, I promise you. Oddly enough, my sister has just put a draft on my dad's grave this morning and sent me a picture of it. So I'm in the same zone that you're in. And I promise you that at some point, not too far away from now, the fact that your dad knew how much you loved him will be a great comfort to you when you think of him happily and fondly. But you can't do that yet. I know you can't. 12:55 is the time, and this week's full disclosure guest is Alex James. It said on my production notes, my notes that I take into the interview, it said bass player and cheesemaker. I found myself thinking, I wonder if there's anyone else in the world ever who has merited that description. He's also now a winemaker. I don't know what clip we've got actually, but here's a little taster of what you can expect from this week's full disclosure.
The very first person I saw when I arrived at the halls of residence, I was getting out of my parents' car holding a guitar, and there was someone else getting out of his parents' car holding a guitar, and it was Graham. It was like literally arrived in London. And we totally clocked each other instantly.
That's fantastic.
It's crazy. And then he introduced me to Damon and Dave, and the first time we were...
How did he know them?
They were already in a band, rubbish band.
Okay. The three of them were?
Yeah, there was another couple of guys in there, but okay. Dave, who was always...
so they were second years? Or
no.
But they knew each other before?
They'd been in a band from Colchester together, but Damon had kind of got a job as a T-boy at a studio, and they kind of sensed the company, the people who run the studio, has kind of sensed his potential. So he was allowed to use the studio when there was no other bookings there. So it was the very last day of the first term. So almost exactly this time of year,
wow.
The last day of college on the first term. Graham said, "We fired the bass player. Do you want to come to the studio with Damon?"
When had they heard you play? How had they heard you play?
Well, Graham and I both had Graham had the room above me,
right?
And we both had acoustic guitars. So he hadn't.
But he knew.
Used to play along to Pixies songs, and actually, there was a piano in the hall, so we used to spend a lot of time playing.
And how much of it was? What would the word be? A fit of being simpatico rather than just like the four you felt right together.
Yeah, well, I definitely felt simpatico with Graham, yeah. But Damon was completely the opposite, you know. Because Graham took me to the studio to meet him, and he was like, "Yeah, you've been in a recording studio before." I was like, "No, I haven't actually." And then he played me this song. He said, "What do you think?" So I said, "Well, you sound like a drama school band. You need to sound like an art school band." And I think that's maybe what.
What did that mean? What did that
I don't know. I don't know. They needed a bass player.
Yes.
So anyway,
and was that the first time the four of you were...
No, I was invited to come back with a bass, and we literally wrote "She's So High," which is a song we were still playing this summer at the very first rehearsal. So it was totally instant. Arriving in London, here's Graham, here's first rehearsal, bang, there's a song that's still resonating, all decades later. And it's mad. It's totally mad.
It's an infectious one, that, I promise you, whether you like Blur or not. And frankly, who doesn't? Alex is just a great storyteller, a great writer as well. He's got a book out looking at that mad year that they've just enjoyed playing Wembley. Of course, leading where Oasis are now set to follow. That's it from me for another day. John liked it. He writes, "It's all downhill from here, James. This morning's show has been a masterpiece. From topics to callers to news reporting and the brilliant Bruce Wayne bat tunnel joke. Bravo." Well, we'll get back to normal service on Monday.
No pressure, Sheila. Yeah, it's fine.
Let me give you, speaking of esteemed and beloved colleagues, Henry Riley's having a crack at the breakfast show this weekend. So
wow.
Do tune in.
There's a fly in the studio.
There is a fly in the studio.
God, how horrible.
There's a rat in the kitchen. Standing in for Matthew Wright, of course. So Henry, very much the future. I was the future once.
I think we've got a bit. It's still left in the tank.
But if you haven't caught Henry on the radio presenting a programme yet, then do try and tune in this weekend. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.